2 flashes of light vanished into the air, leaving behind 2 shimmering treasures that Bai Zemin hadn't seen before. At least, not from treasure orbs. Until now, he hadn't possessed anything quite like them. The first was a flowing robe, its deep blue fabric dancing gently in the breeze. It resembled the elegant attire often worn by immortal women in light novels, though it lacked the ornate excess typical of those fictional garments. Curious, Bai Zemin extended his fingers and brushed the hem. The material was impossibly smooth. As soon as his skin made contact, information surged into his retina. Combat robe. Rare-grade treasure, a full-body robe capable of blocking edged weapons and even small-caliber bullets. Grants +5 to all stats when worn. The robe reminded him of his own full coat, though clearly tailored more toward women. The mechanics might differ slightly, but the essence was similar: defense and stat enhancement. The second item gleamed as sunlight touched it. A sleek, metallic crossbow with an elegant design. Quick crossbow. Normal-grade treasure capable of loading up to 5 bolts simultaneously and firing up to twice per second. Grants +5 agility and +2 strength when equipped. Bai Zemin scratched the back of his head, then turned to the 2 people beside him. So, how should we divide these? Shangwan Bingshui and Chun He exchanged glances, their expressions serious as they considered the decision. After a long pause, Chun He stepped forward, pointing at the crossbow. I'll take this one. My current weapon isn't enough anymore. Even if I replace it later, I need something to help me survive until then. Bai Zemin looked at Shangwan Bingshui. Her gaze wasn't on the crossbow or the robe. It was fixed on his coat. You're lucky, she muttered, then sighed as she motioned to the combat robe. As much as I want that skill scroll, I need protection more. I'm not strong enough yet to risk everything for potential. If I don't survive, I won't ever find out what that skill does. Both Chun He and Shangwan Bingshui had been tempted by the third reward, the first-order max-level skill scroll, regeneration. Despite its seemingly underwhelming description, they both knew a skill of that level and order couldn't be ordinary. It was likely to grow into something extraordinary with time. But that was the problem, time. Neither of them had the confidence to gamble on a long-term benefit when short-term survival wasn't guaranteed. Especially not when they stood beside someone like Bai Zemin, whose strength only made them more painfully aware of their limitations. The robe would effectively grant Shangwan Bingshui the equivalent of 5 levels worth of stats, plus bullet and blade protection. For Chun He, the crossbow offered not only combat utility, but also a sharp boost to agility, his core stat. Bai Zemin, with no hesitation, picked up the scroll. Then I won't hold back. Good for you, little Zemin. Lilith hovered nearby, her voice tinged with amusement. Yet her eyes were locked on the scroll, a faint glimmer of curiosity dancing within them. Without ceremony, Bai Zemin activated the scroll. It dissolved into radiant light before disappearing into his chest. He felt a ripple within his soul as a golden rune etched itself deep into his essence, etched with glowing cracks that pulsed faintly like living veins. His second active external skill was now his. But it wasn't what he expected. Regeneration didn't heal wounds. It didn't restore health. Instead, it replenished stamina over time. It felt anticlimactic. Yet Bai Zemin understood its hidden value. In a drawn-out fight between equally powerful enemies, the one who lasted longer, who could continue swinging their weapon after the other collapsed, would always have the advantage. Regenerating stamina might not seem flashy, but it was the difference between winning and dying in the long run. Still, for now, I won't need it much, he thought. His stamina was already his highest body stat aside from mana and magic. He made a mental note to investigate the skill's evolution path later. For now, he turned to Chun He. Let's go. You said there was something important to talk about. Chun He nodded. Yes, let's head to the parking lot. Together, the 3 descended. Underground parking lot. What awaited them below was chaos. Liang Peng, Fu Xiefeng, Kai Jingyi, Zhongde, and Kanglan were in the middle of what looked like a brutal crackdown. Survivors were being pushed aside, dragged back, even knocked out with swift strikes. Some had clearly gone mad, rushing forward like feral beasts, fists raised as if they had forgotten who they were dealing with. Several bodies lay scattered across the floor, lifeless, battered beyond recognition, trampled and broken. Shangwan Bing Shui stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with disbelief. What is happening? Bai Zemin was just as stunned. He'd only been gone for a few minutes. How had things fallen apart so quickly? Beside him, Lilith floated into view, her tone calm, detached. Humans are animals, Bai Zemin. Intelligent ones, yes, but that only makes them more dangerous when cornered. When fear takes over, logic vanishes. Even a house cat will claw a dog if death seems certain. These people saw Chun He fail against that ape, and doubt infected them like a plague. They panicked and let their demons surface. Bai Zemin stared at the carnage in silence, fists slowly tightening at his sides. Lilith's voice lowered, as if challenging him. So, what will you do now? Bai Zemin's expression shifted several times as Lilith's words echoed in his mind. His gaze swept over the chaos unfolding before him. Uncertainty and hesitation reflected in his eyes, until something clicked. A flash of steel-like resolve settled across his face. He stepped forward. Bai Zemin, wait. Shangwan Bing Shui called after him. Hold on. Chun tried to follow, but Bai Zemin ignored them both. His focus had locked on a scene that made his blood run cold, and then boil. A male student had just thrown a female teacher to the ground, her body hitting the hard floor with a sickening thud. She screamed, fear, desperation, disbelief. But in the surrounding chaos, her cries were drowned by the shrieks and curses of other terrified survivors. The student climbed atop her with bloodshot eyes and an expression twisted by madness. As he clawed at her clothes, he shouted manically, Chun He couldn't even beat that monster. We're all dead anyway, so I'll at least have some fun first. Ha ha ha. The scene toward something deep within Bai Zemin. It was more than rage, it was a raw, primal disgust. The outbreak of violence had happened fast. Just minutes earlier, someone at the entrance had shouted about Chun He being in danger, and that single spark had set the powder keg ablaze. Panic spread like wildfire. Many succumbed to it. A few embraced it. Now, more than 20 people were already dead. Dozens more were injured. And even though Liang Peng, Fu Xiefeng, and the others were trying to hold the line, 500 panicked people could not be contained by 5. And worst of all, those inciting the chaos had realized something chilling. Even if they were caught, they'd only be roughed up and tossed aside. In their minds, if they were going to die anyway, why not indulge their ugliest urges? As Bai Zemin continued walking, his mind briefly drifted back to the day he met Lilith. She had told him she was a succubus, a demon. Back then, he had regarded her with suspicion, with justified caution. After all, demons were supposed to be evil, manipulative, dangerous. But now, staring at the carnage wrought by humans, the ones he thought he understood, Bai Zemin couldn't help but reflect. What did it mean to be a demon? Was it pride, wrath, lust, envy, greed? Those traits existed in humans too, magnified now in this apocalyptic nightmare. Perhaps demons weren't the ones with horns and wings. Perhaps they were the ones wearing school uniforms and pretending to be victims. His hand touched the student's shoulder. Wait your turn, damn it, the man barked, too lost in his delusion to realize who was behind him. Once I'm done with this bee. He froze mid-sentence. Recognition hit him like a thunderclap. Why you? Bai? The rest never left his lips. Bai Zemin's hand shot forward. Crack. His fingers crushed the man's windpipe with mechanical precision. The student collapsed, eyes wide with terror, never understanding how death came so quickly. Without a pause, Bai Zemin's body became a blur. Whoosh, crack. Another student, mid-swing in a brutal beating, dropped like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Before the victim could even comprehend what happened, Bai Zemin was gone. Whoosh, crack, thud. Again and again, he moved like a shadow with fangs, silent, swift, lethal. The only sound left in his wake was the snapping of necks. Screams of horror and agony filled the underground lot. But now, layered beneath them was something new, silence. The kind of silence that follows a predator entering the den. More and more survivors began to notice. People were dying, but not just anyone. Only the instigators, the ones assaulting others, the ones rioting, looting, hurting. One by one, they were collapsing in terrifying silence. What's happening? A burly student shouted, glancing around in wild panic. Who's doing this? Come out and fight me, damn it. Crack. His voice and his life ended in an instant. He hit the ground without understanding who or what had killed him. With his current agility stat pushing 126, Bai Zemin moved over 12 times faster than the average human. In an open field, his speed was terrifying. In a confined space like this underground lot, he was an unstoppable force of nature. In less than a minute, the slaughter was done. All of the chaos mongers, the rioters, the predators, the criminals had been dealt with. 42 men and 6 women lay lifeless across the bloodstained ground. The rest of the survivors, now fewer than 500, stood frozen in place, staring. And at the center of the carnage stood Bai Zemin. He didn't pant. He didn't tremble. He didn't even look disturbed. He stood calmly, as if he had just finished organizing supplies or delivered speech, as if the heap of bodies around him was nothing more than a byproduct of necessary order. He looked down at his hands. Nothing. No shaking. No disgust. No remorse. It was his first time killing so many in one go. But there was no pain. No regret. Shouldn't he feel something? At least a flicker of unease? But no. All he felt was clarity. A quiet certainty that what he did was necessary. That it was right. And maybe, just maybe, that was more terrifying than the killing itself.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
What did make Bai Zemin feel just very slightly uncomfortable was that even if he did not know these people before this, and even had no idea that they were among the survivors, when he killed them, he did not have a right to choose whether he wished to know them or not. The reason? It was because every time Bai Zemin broke a survivor's neck, the following messages appeared in green letters flashing in his retina. You have acquired the soul power of Chun Luochun, level 0. You have acquired the soul power of Mei Xiao, level 0. You have acquired the soul power of... You have acquired. Again and again, a small part of each person's soul power was absorbed by him, and Bai Zemin was able to learn their names and some simple things like how old each one was. As for getting some kind of power from them, considering they were just normal survivors, Bai Zemin naturally didn't expect something like that. People often said that the eyes were the window to the soul, and that a look said more than 1,000 words. He confirmed it at this moment. Raising his head, Bai Zemin saw that everyone was looking at him with different expressions. Some were looking at him with fear, others with gratitude, shock, disbelief, and many other emotions or thoughts that were difficult to decipher. Who was the first person to cause all this mess? Amidst so much silence and uneasiness, his voice was the only thing that could be heard inside the subway, with the occasional roar of some distant creature. Every time his gaze met that of a survivor, many of them did not dare to look directly at him and unconsciously looked at the corpses on the ground, as if they wanted to remember that this person with an indifferent expression had just killed them. Bai Zemin also did not press the matter too much and nodded. I see. Since none of you want to talk, then I guess you don't need to eat anymore. His words seemed to have some effect, as many people's faces changed slightly. This was especially so for the female students who had suffered almost a week locked up in the female dormitory. I don't think that among so many people present, not even one of you can remember anything. Bai Zemin shook his head and waited patiently while looking towards no particular point. The place was silent for a few seconds, and Chun, he looked like he wanted to step forward to say something, but Shangguan Bing Shui stopped him. He also looked at Wu Yijuan for help, but she just shook her head. With no other option, he had no choice but to remain silent. After almost a full minute of silence, a female student stepped forward, attracting everyone's attention. What is your name? Bai Zemin looked at her and smiled slightly, a smile that was somehow calm, but also contrasting sharply with the current situation. Hesitantly, the female student spoke softly. My name is Nieyu. Nyeyu? I see. Bai Zemin nodded and asked once more. Nyeyu, did you see something? You don't need to worry about any kind of consequences, or much less. I assure you that if anyone dares to verbally assault you, give you unkind looks, or even try to touch a hair on your head after this, I will personally make sure that person or persons regret not letting themselves be eaten by zombies. Some people's expressions changed for the worse, while the expression on Nyeyu's face eased noticeably. After a deep breath, she turned away from the crowd of people and began to point at some survivors while saying in a serious voice, I remember when Big Brother Bai and Big Sister Shangwan went to help Big Brother Chun. These people started pushing and shouting. Some of them even beat up some people before mingling with the crowd. It's a lie. Big Brother Bai, that girl is a liar. You can't believe her. How could I beat up someone? Can't you see that I'm injured too? Among the more than 6 survivors who were pointed out by Nyeyu, some of them immediately turned pale and started shouting words of injustice. While it was true that Nyeyu might be lying, Bai Zemin's reasoning was simple. Did she gain anything by lying? She had absolutely nothing to gain, and on the contrary, she would be risking being marked by the other survivors, which would lead to Bai Zemin potentially killing her or expelling her from the group, which was basically the same as ending her life. Fu Xiefeng, Kai Jingyi, Zhongde Konglan, take them out and bring those ungrateful dogs here. Bai Zemin's voice thundered and his calm expression finally disappeared, being replaced by fury. Hearing the clearly angry tone of voice from him, the 4 named people did not dare to delay, and using their superior stats and levels easily pulled the targeted people out of the group of survivors, dragging them out by force. Even the weakest of the 4 of them, Kong Lan, was at least 2 to 3 times stronger than a normal person, so any resistance or attempt to resist was futile. As the survivors were pulled out of the crowd, Shengwan Bing Shui narrowed her eyes and took a step forward as she looked at an old acquaintance. Lian Xian. She stood a short distance away from Bai Zemin and looked at the past vice president of the Student Association with coldness. Lian Xian was a level 3 evolved person, so among the survivors, he was basically invincible. However, when he tried to resist, Kai Jingyi easily reduced him thanks to her overwhelmingly superior agility. I didn't do anything. I really didn't do anything. Bing Shui, haven't you known me for several years? Don't you know what kind of person I am? At this moment, Lian Xian had lost his past polite and glorious demeanor. He looked at Shangwan Bing Shui and began to yell and beg with a pale face, clearly knowing that death was the only thing that awaited him. Seeing such behavior, Lilith could not help but chuckle. This Lian Xian had sacrificed a girl's life during the first day of the apocalypse to survive and had not even thought twice about it when he threw her before the blade of the fast mantis. Yet now he looked like a fish jumping on a chopping board awaiting his inevitable fate. Bai Zemin looked at Shangwan Bing Shui and announced indifferently, even if he is your friend, he is not being spared from this. Since all these people still did not understand the cruelty of this world and the danger of the monsters running rampant outside was not enough, then he was going to show them all that if they did not behave in obedient lambs, then only death awaited them. Since they wanted to be cowardly lambs, he was going to turn them all into cowardly but obedient lambs. Obedient to the point where his word was more valuable than God's decree. You don't need to say it. I'll take care of him myself. Shangwan Bing Shui did not even look at Bai Zemin, but her words startled him noticeably. You will take care of him? Bai Zemin frowned and looked at her with a hint of mockery as he said coldly, What? Could it be that you have the courage and determination to end his life? The reason for his mocking tone stemmed from the fact that he did not believe she would dare to dictate the punishment he would sentence and carry out. From Bai Zemin's point of view, Shangwan Bing Shui was just a spoiled little princess who threw tantrums by acting cold and untouchable. She turned her face and looked at him so coldly that her cold looks in the past seemed like child's play in comparison. You don't know anything about me. Bai Zemin couldn't help, but his eyes widened slightly more than usual, and under his incredulous gaze, she took a step forward. Her delicate white hand shimmered, and the temperature began to plummet as a wave of frost formed around it before turning into a dagger of ice. Bing Shui. Chunyi opened his eyes wide and muttered in shock. Wu Yujin's face also changed, and her expression became complicated as she looked at her friend slowly moving forward. Still, she didn't seem to have any intention of stopping her. Unlike most people, due to her status, Wu Yujin had also seen many cruel things in the past and knew that even the previous society was just a jungle with rules. But after all, a jungle was a jungle no matter how much it was decorated. Hey, this must be a joke, isn't it? Bing Shui. Lian Xian bellowed and tried to back away in fright. However, under Bai Zemin's intense gaze, Zhongde kept him on his knees, even if he was also scared of what was about to happen. During the past few days, Lian Xian's mental condition was becoming more and more unstable to the point that several times wild and crazy ideas appeared in his mind, but he forcibly restrained them. However, when the slightest opportunity presented itself, he did not even hesitate for a second and took it gladly. Too bad, that was one of his biggest mistakes. Shangguan Bing Shui stopped a step away and shook her head as she said coldly, "We risk our lives, we scavenge for food. We rack our brains trying to think of the best way to keep you all safe. But what do we get in return? Nothing. Everything would be easier if we left you behind, because honestly all of you are a heavy burden. However, instead of doing that, we support and feed you while keeping you safe." Her words were not just for Lian Xian to hear. They were for everyone present. The survivors who had done nothing wrong nodded and looked at the people who had been dragged out with anger-filled gazes. Many of them even couldn't help but raise their voices as they cursed them and complained. However, when Shangguan Bing Shui's voice sounded again, the rest of the voices were immediately silenced. "We ask for nothing in return except that everyone behaves themselves, that you don't add more weight on our shoulders, and that you don't make things more complicated than they already are." She looked at Lian Xian, and her eyes flashed with a chill as she said, "Approximately 20 people died because of your selfish acts, and you still want to live? Go to hell, you scum." Under the terrified look of Lian Xian, the shocked look of many survivors, and the disbelieving look of Chun He, Shangguan Bing Shui raised her slender arm and swiftly struck downward. The ice dagger was extremely sharp and easily penetrated the center of Lian Xian's skull, ending his life just like that. What was most remarkable was that even as his corpse slumped to the side, not even a drop of blood came out of the wound, as the ice dagger had become a natural insulating layer, sealing everything tightly inside. The place fell into a stony silence, and even Bai Zemin himself could not help but stare at Shangguan Bing Shui. After several seconds, he admitted, I guess you're right, and I don't know anything about you. Daring to kill a person took some courage, but it was possible for anyone who set out to do so, and even more so in this world where death was practically easier to obtain than a piece of bread. But the hard part was to keep calm after doing it. Shangguan Bing Shui's expression was cold and indifferent as always, and her hand did not even quiver as she performed the act, nor did she flinch at the end. Although she had just taken the life of a human being, it was as if it was nothing otherworldly to her. Obviously, she was also someone who had her own past and her own story to tell. Seeing that she said nothing, Bai Zemin simply shook his head before looking at Fu Xiefeng. He asked in a deep voice, "You dare to kill a person?" Fu Xiefeng's face changed greatly, and a frightened expression shone in his eyes. He was brave enough to fight and kill enemies of other races. But killing humans whose sins were not worthy of death was hard for him to do. RNO Epsilon. Bai Zemin also seemed to realize his answer without having to hear it from his mouth. He nodded and silently took out a strange-looking knife from his backpack as he said, "This dagger is a rare-grade treasure, on the same level as my sword but slightly inferior. If you kill him, this dagger is yours then." A Garth dagger, rare-grade treasure, a dagger focused to finish off the enemy at lightning speed. Can cut metal with ease. When equipped, it automatically increases agility by +12 and strength by +5. The dagger was the item that came out of the orange orb he obtained when defeating the First Order Shadow Tiger. Bai Zemin already had his Xianyuan sword and felt more comfortable wielding it compared to the Agarth dagger. Therefore, instead of keeping it, he decided to give it to one of his direct subordinates, which in a way meant increasing his own power. Fu Xiefeng's gaze lingered on the dagger. He knew that what Bai Zemin was doing was tempting him, and it was indeed working. However, he took too long to decide, and his chance was snatched away by someone else with greater determination. "I'll do it," a female voice rang out. "I dare to kill people." Bai Zemin looked at the pretty Kai Jingyi, who had a slightly pale face but whose eyes glittered with determination, and nodded with a smile as he casually pointed at a survivor. "Here, take this dagger and kill him. It will be yours from then on." Kai Jingyi took a deep breath and nodded, walking towards him and taking the dagger in his hands. The resolve in her eyes burned even more fervently as she saw the weapon's stats. She was determined to seize every opportunity to become stronger, no matter how vicious it was. That was precisely why she was willing to take the risk of fighting and took Bai Zemin's hand at that time. Besides, Kai Jingyi was a smart girl and knew that facing other human beings would only be a matter of time, considering that within this group alone there were already so many problems. Her thinking was simple: since sooner or later I will have to kill if I want to survive in this world and still retain some dignity, then better sooner than later. If it was about courage, perhaps Kai Jingyi was slightly inferior in comparison to Fu Xiefeng. But if it was about determination to accomplish goals, she definitely surpassed him by far. Seeing the dagger in Kai Jingyi's hands, Fu Xiefeng could not help but regret and quickly exclaimed, "W8, I will do it." Too bad, his chance had already passed. Too late. Bai Zemin coldly refused and remarked, "If you want to become stronger, you'll have to take the chances I give you when I give them to you. Otherwise, you'll have to manage on your own to get power." Was there really anyone who, even in their unconscious, did not wish to be stronger? In the past, human beings would try to acquire more money, and when they finally had that money, they would want more. When they had enough money to make their lives as luxurious and comfortable as possible, human beings would seek political power or military command. The human mind always wanted more and was never really satisfied, even after achieving its past goals. This was even more so in this new world after the arrival of the soul record on Earth. In this new apocalyptic world, the possibilities of becoming stronger were literally everywhere. All one had to do was to pick up any weapon and go out into the streets to fight zombies or any other existence that would allow them to evolve regardless of whether they were weak or strong. However, while the possibilities of being stronger were everywhere, this rule also applied to the possibilities of dying. A person had to be mentally prepared for the fact that, at the moment of leaving, he or she might never come back. While everyone wanted to be stronger, while everyone wanted power, to receive respect, to eat the best food, and to enjoy the praise and longing gazes of beauties, very few were willing to take the risk involved in attaining such successes. Just now, Bai Zemin had given Fu Xiefeng the opportunity to become far stronger, but he failed to appreciate it and missed out. Acquiring a weapon, especially a rare-grade treasure, was far more important than even having food or safe shelter. Because with a weapon of such caliber, even a normal human being would acquire the power to fight zombies or other creatures, evolve, and acquire food or shelter with their own hands. Fu Xiefeng was not willing to kill? Sure, Bai Zemin would not force him. But even if he knelt down and begged, crying tears of regret, it was too late. Such opportunities were not easy to obtain, and since he chose his morality above all else, then he had to take responsibility for his own choices and consequences. Feeling Fu Xiefeng's envious and regretful gaze upon her, Kai Jingyi gritted her teeth and raised the dagger with trembling hands. "W8, I beg you not to kill me." The student's eyes were wide open, and the terror in his face was so great that he seemed on the verge of going mad. But how could he not be terrified? This was about death. His death. Just imagine what would have happened if you didn't have strength. Bai Zemin's voice sounded behind her, encouraging her and giving her bravery. If your luck was bad, maybe you would be dead. If your luck was, shall we say, good, you might have been abused by scum like him. Hearing his words, Kai Jingyi bit her lip and stopped hesitating. Under the terrified gaze of the student and the shocked look of the others, her arm waved at a speed difficult for normal people to follow. The young student felt pain in his chest, and as he looked down, he saw blood begin to ooze from a small puncture right into his heart. He looked up and momentarily met the eyes of his killer before the light in his gaze faded and his lifeless body collapsed on the ground. Kai Jingyi's face lost all color, and she brought a hand to her mouth as she looked at the red blood staining the ground. She took several unsteady steps backward, but two firm arms clung to her and kept her from falling to the ground. Good job. Now you have not only avenged those who died for his act of selfishness, but also gained strength. Isn't that good? Bai Zemin praised and encouraged her. Why, yes, that's true. Kai Jingyi could barely speak and nodded. While it was true that Bai Zemin's words were laced with all sorts of manipulations, the reality was that she was willing to hold on to them at this moment. After calming his subordinate and under the watchful eyes of everyone, Bai Zemin took out another item from his backpack. The object was a pair of gloves with pointed knuckles that seemed to be able to break a rock with their hardness. This pair of gloves was actually the second item he obtained from the Shadow Tiger's final orb. Obviously, Bai Zemin was out of luck since he possessed better gloves. Power gloves, normal grade treasure, able to break through the defenses of any enemy below level 15. When equipped, it automatically increases strength by +3. Zhonda, do you want them? Bai Zemin waved the gloves and asked as he looked at the big man. While the gloves were not so good, the amount of stat points was equivalent to almost 2 levels. 2 initial levels might not seem much, but after level 15, leveling up was not so easy and required quite a lot of effort. Therefore, 3 stat points were really good from that point of view. After a second of hesitation and seeing Kai Jingyi stroking her new weapon now more calmly than before, Zhonda nodded and took a step forward. He said nothing and directly punched on the chest of another survivor who had incited the chaos, destroying his heart into pieces directly along with several bones. The male student spat blood and with eyes filled with disbelief collapsed lifelessly just like his previous companion. Unlike Kai Jingyi, his face turned pale, but his reaction was much calmer. He picked up the gloves and equipped them before falling silent again. Seeing that he was a man of few words, Bai Zemin chuckled and praised. Well done, Zhongda. Konglan, the next opportunity that comes your way will be for you, as long as it is something that suits your style of evolution. He did not forget about his last subordinate and the only healer in the group. It was Circumflex. Konglan took a deep breath and nodded firmly. She felt a little jealous that she didn't have the opportunity to acquire a treasure, but at the same time, she was relieved that she didn't have to kill a person. Such conflicting feelings caused her to unconsciously feel a little relieved to have more time to adjust to all the sudden change. After the death of 2 more survivors, the other 4 who had caused trouble were naturally terrified. However, before they could utter a single word, a shadow appeared before them and crushed their necks in a second, ending their lives without hesitation and without unnecessary explanation. After finishing off the main source of the problem, Bai Zemin looked at the survivors, and this time he did not care in any way about the looks he was receiving. All of you, let me say this for the first and only time to you. His voice as cold as his eyes echoed in the subway. From this damned second on, if any of you dare to cause the slightest trouble or disobey, you will be whipped until you feel your flesh fall off your bodies. Don't you want to work? Don't you want to help? Sure, then stay obediently in the corner and don't stand in my way. If any of you dare to obstruct me even once, depending on the level of trouble caused, I will personally take it upon myself to end your dogs' lives. The face of everyone present turned pale, and they all nodded repeatedly. Although none of them had particularly done anything wrong, they were secretly reminding each other over and over again to be careful not to break any of the rules laid down as the consequences were too serious to bear. Seeing everyone nodding obediently, Bai Zemin casually concluded, if any of you are dissatisfied, then you can get the hell out of here right now. Neither I nor anyone else will stop you. Some people seemed hesitant to hear his final words, especially some hot-blooded male students who were not willing to be treated like dogs. However, the hot blood of these people cooled down as they remembered the danger outside and obediently swallowed all their disaffection. Seeing no one saying anything and no one standing out to leave, Bai Zemin coldly sneered before looking at Chun-Hee and the rest. After the previous matter settled down, the survivors moved the bodies to a corner by direct orders from Bai Zemin himself. Even those who were disgusted or afraid of blood, as well as scared of seeing the lifeless bodies, were forced to work this time. Because everyone knew that the mood of this new god of death was not good at this very moment. They all obediently swallowed their complaints and dragged the bodies deep into the subway parking lot in groups to avoid attracting other creatures. Bai Zemin looked at the corpses with some regret. Actually, he wanted to use one of those guys as a test specimen to experiment with a mutated plant to make sure it was a real treasure and not a time bomb. However, in the end, he decided not to do it. The reason was simple. He did not want Shengguan Bing Shui and the others to know about the existence of the plant. At least not yet. If he took the plant out at that time, the secret would be revealed, and if he dragged one of the subjects away, it would be suspicious. Therefore, his hands were temporarily tied as far as this matter was concerned. So, can you explain what happened? I hope you have a good reason for having gone out alone or otherwise. After walking far enough away from the other survivors without any combat capability, Bai Zemin looked at Chun-Hee and narrowed his eyes. All the chaos before, from a certain point of view, was closely related to Chun-Hee. Therefore, if he could not give a good explanation now, it was highly probable that Bai Zemin would not be able to restrain himself and would end up, at the very least, beating him for being irresponsible. Chun-Hee wanted to talk to Shengguan Bing Shui about what had just happened, but he could also feel strong pressure coming from Bai Zemin's body, so he wisely decided to leave the matter for another time. He took a deep breath and felt, for the first time in his life, small. Small as if he was a little puppy being observed by a hungry and wild lion. The reason I went out was to explore the road. Although during the past few days we tried to clear most of the surrounding strong creatures, if one sneaked into the perimeter, casualties could happen and the chaos could become fatal. Chun-Hee explained carefully. After a moment of silence, Bai Zemin relaxed slightly and nodded. If that was the motive, then it made perfect sense. After all, a zombie did not represent a danger, but a mutated cat or dog did represent extreme danger due to its fast movement speed. If even one of those creatures managed to sneak in among the survivors, even Bai Zemin himself would have a hard time preventing human deaths. No matter how strong he was, at the end of the day, he was only one person and could not take care of nearly 500 people. Even with the addition of the other evolved ones in the group, it would be an incredibly arduous, if not impossible task. So, how do I end an exploration trip in a 4-meter-tall ape beating you up? Bai Zemin asked casually. Chun-Hee blushed slightly and couldn't help but reply, "It didn't beat me up. It didn't even touch me." "Whatever." Bai Zemin waved his hand and rolled his eyes. "The giant ape didn't beat you up, but it sure made you run all over the place like a chicken in a barnyard." He thought secretly. Anyway, Chun-Hee coughed and secretly looked at Shengguan Bing Shui before continuing. His expression turned extremely serious, and there was even a tinge of fear in his eyes as he said, "At first, there was no problem. Just some normal zombies that were stuck inside some buildings, and the like. However, after approximately 2 hours passed, and just as I was approaching the exit, I noticed that the atmosphere was starting to change." The atmosphere was starting to change? Shengguan Bing Shui remarked uncertainly and looked at her childhood friend strangely. Bai Zemin also frowned and for a moment thought that perhaps Chun-Hee's head really had been hit by the giant ape after all. However, he soon realized that this was not the case. Chun-Hee's expression was terribly serious, as he said firmly. Not only had the mood suddenly become much heavier, but even the surroundings were no longer the same. The buildings from before were surrounded by tall grass to the point of almost reaching my knees. The trees seemed to have grown at least 2 or 3 times the normal size. The more they listened, the more Bai Zemin and the rest were surprised. Everything Chun-Hee was mentioned seemed to be something out of a fantasy or science fiction movie, and if it were in the past, anyone would treat it as a joke. However, what was not possible in this world? Each person even had a status window where they could see their personal stats and even become monstrously powerful by defeating other existences and learning magical skills. Talking about common sense in this new world wasn't necessarily a smart thing to do. Besides, I think I might have found the source from which all those damn bugs and weird mutated monsters come from. Chunhee concluded, and in the end couldn't help but curse under his breath. Bai Zemin's face finally changed, and he took a step forward as he hurriedly urged, "What did you see?" Bai Zemin had always felt that something was wrong with this place. Ever since the appearance of the blazing beetle, he had realized that first-order creatures were not existences that mankind could casually face. To defeat monsters, such as those possessing strange skills, probably only a properly armed army could defeat them. A beta. However, in this place alone, Bai Zemin and his group had already faced 4 such existences. 5 if one counted the fast mantis that was in the process of evolving. If the university alone was already like this, then wouldn't the outside world be in an even worse catastrophic situation? But from Chunhee's words, the situation seemed to have an explanation and a logical reason. Out of curiosity and to get some information, I went a little deeper into the forest. Chunhee explained slowly, narrating the events that happened a few hours ago. At first, I was surprised that there was no danger at all, but when I got to what I think must be the center of the place, I saw a large number of terrifying monsters next to a strange creature that appeared to be a silkworm. I think that silkworm is the main problem here, since they all seem to be protecting it. Terrifying monsters? A silkworm-like creature? Bai Zemin looked at each other and noticed the same confusion as well as shock and fear. Chunhee, those terrifying monsters you speak of, could it be that they are? Shangwan Bing Shui looked worried about something and didn't even finish her question properly. Still, everyone understood what she meant. They are, to the horror of most. Chunhee nodded firmly and slowly said, "Just from the aura alone, they are definitely first order. All of them." Bai Zemin, Shangwan Bing Shui, and Liang Peng's faces turned extremely ugly upon hearing Chunhee's words. Shangwan Bing Shui and Liang Peng had experienced the power of a first-order creature firsthand, so they knew how terrifying those beasts were. While it was true that both of them had since become far stronger after absorbing the soul power of the anti-magic zombie and other creatures, the fear still lingered. Although Chunhee had not said how many first-order creatures there were in that strange forest, he mentioned having found in the middle of the university only 3 or 4 of those monsters were enough to cause problems for the current group. As for if there were more than that amount and they attacked all together, then it would be difficult to survive. Even Bai Zemin himself had no confidence in facing many first-order existences unless he himself completed his own evolution. If it was 2 or maybe 3 at the same time, then he could somehow manage if he put his life on the line during combat. However, more than that number was beyond his ability, which made him feel helpless. It's still not enough. I really am still too weak. If only I could kill several tens or several hundreds at the same time. How good would it be? Bai Zemin secretly sighed. If Lilith knew his thoughts, she might die due to anger. He was already the biggest anomaly she had ever seen in her entire life or heard of since the appearance of the first intelligent being, but he still seemed to be unsatisfied. How many of those creatures did you see? Even if you don't know the exact number, you should have a rough idea, shouldn't you? Bai Zemin asked after a moment's consideration. While knowing the truth could sometimes become demoralizing, if a person sank into fantasies of lies, then it was only a matter of time before they died in this world. To survive, Bai Zemin understood that not only strength was needed, but also to be realistic and accept things as they were no matter how difficult they were. Otherwise, anyone could end up being devoured not by an enemy, but by oneself. Chunhee took a deep breath and looked at everyone present before saying with a tinge of fear in his voice, "At the very least, there should be about 7 creatures of the first order. As for the maximum number, my estimate is around a dozen. 7 minimum and a dozen maximum." Liang Peng muttered in disbelief, remembering the speed and combat prowess of the anti-magic zombie that nearly cut him in 2. Everyone held their breath, and looks of despair flashed in the eyes of some of them. Although Fu Xiefeng and the rest had no idea how strong a first-order creature really was, they could remember the oppressive feeling coming from the dead body of the giant beetle and the blue-skinned, mutated zombie. Besides, It didn't take a genius, as the expressions on the faces of those who had faced such beings said enough to make words unnecessary. After several seconds of uncomfortable silence and under an oppressive atmosphere, Bai Zemin's voice called out, "It seems we need to prepare a few things before we leave if we want to get the other survivors out of this place. Otherwise, the chances of even one of them surviving will be practically 0%. If Bai Zemin wanted to leave alone, then he was confident that except for agility-based first-order creatures like the shadow tiger, no other creature or existence could really stop their footsteps unless one of them had strange skill. However, if he wanted to go off on his own, he would have tried it long ago instead of staying here, trying to raise a power by himself." Shengwan Bing Shui also calmed down after a deep breath that accentuated her perfect body even more. She nodded and spoke calmly. "That's right. It looks like we need to adjust a few things." Even without Bai Zemin saying anything, she had already understood a few things, and various ideas were constantly forming in her mind. After a brief discussion, the group called the survivors together again, and a group of them began to set to work on the task assigned by Bai Zemin. While the survivors were doing their part, Bai Zemin met with Shengwan Bing Shui, Chunhe, Liang Peng, and the rest to discuss some final outlines of the plan. If the plan succeeded, then they could probably retreat without casualties. But if the plan failed, then it would be difficult for the vast majority of them to survive. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Because Bai Zemin and the rest were somewhat tired after working all day modifying the 10 buses, and because the sun had already begun to descend on the horizon, they all went to sleep after dinner. With the start of day number 11 since the arrival of the soul record on Earth, the 10 buses were fully loaded. The end seats were removed, and the freezers were filled with meat and all kinds of perishable food. On top of the freezers were placed the bags of food, and the survivors, who now numbered just over 400 after the previous day's massacre, were able to settle in with ease and comfort. One of the buses carried only 3 things: the corpse of the shadow tiger, the headless body of the platinum ape, and the body of the fast mantis. Although it was somewhat problematic to carry the silver ape's body inside, on top it was easy, and with Liang Peng and Zhonda working together, they managed to lift the beast's body without any problems. In fact, there was even enough space left over to carry all the clothes they had obtained from the male and female dormitory earlier, as well as other types of utilities. Unlike the female dormitory, which had several survivors thanks to the strange behavior of the first-order anti-magic zombie, the students who had barricaded themselves in the male dormitory had not been so lucky. 2 days ago, when Bai Zemin and the rest arrived at the male dormitory, the doors had been broken down, and the survivors inside had already turned into zombies or had simply been eaten by other zombies or some other creature. The buses were started by their respective drivers, and slowly and orderly began to move. The engines roared in sync, attracting the attention of the distant zombies who with overwhelmingly slow speeds began to stagger toward the scene. The small convoy of 10 vehicles circled the main street on the north side of the university that connected to the south side and the only exit from the facility that allowed buses to pass. Although the road had already been cleared once for the most part, it was impossible to wipe out all the zombies considering their numbers unless one was willing to spend several days searching and hunting. Therefore, occasionally a few zombies would appear in the middle of the road. However, the drivers, who were normal survivors, did not bother with them and simply continued to push on without altering the course in the slightest. Bang, 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 bang. The buses, which had been modified and reinforced using the first-order blazing beetle shell, viciously hit the zombies and sent them flying several meters. Some zombies had their skulls directly crushed by the heavy collision, while some luckier ones got back on their feet with some ignored bone fractures or simply crawled on their hands after losing mobility in their lower bodies. It really changed everything. Shengwan Bing Shui couldn't help but let her eyes widen in shock. This is nothing. Just wait until you get more to the center and you'll see the difference. Chunhe, who had sat beside her, remarked with a serious expression. Even though he had expected it after listening to Chun, he explaining the situation the day before, Bai Zemin could not help his face from changing slightly as he scanned the surroundings while the bus he was riding on slowly moved forward. The familiar buildings built with the best materials available and whose plans were designed by the best architects in the country, were now cracked while some suspicious-looking tangles surrounded the walls. Some areas of the road had been cracked by long roots of trees or other extremely strange plants growing everywhere, forcing the drivers of the vehicles to slow down their speed even more. But the most striking thing was that even from a considerable distance, Bai Zemin and the rest could already see the tops of several trees that had previously been only a few meters high, now silently rising up several tens of meters as if they wanted everyone to see them, announcing their growth. The faces of the survivors changed and their expressions varied. But for the most part, they were all surprised and scared at the same time as they huddled together and began to whisper softly. Although they were frightened at the strange and unfamiliar sight, no survivor present dared to make too much noise. This was so not only for fear of the unknown dangers that might lurk nearby, but also because Bai Zemin's exhibition of cruelty and decisiveness in the killing had been deeply engraved in the minds of all of them. Those with malicious intentions or ulterior motives had basically been slaughtered yesterday, and those who still had some kind of wild thoughts did not have the courage to do anything for fear of having their necks destroyed without warning. Therefore, although the atmosphere was oppressive, no one made too much noise apart from the inevitable, and everything went quite smoothly. Shangguan Bingshui, being the observant woman that she was, also noticed the change inside the bus she was riding. She could not help but look out the front window at the bus in front of her with complex eyes. Obviously, the actions initiated yesterday by Bai Zemin were showing immediate results. The buses stopped next to the back of a 6- or 7-story building that was formerly used as the main library, and the survivors began to deboard in an organized manner under the watchful eyes of the 8 fighters of the group. Bai Zemin, along with Chun, he went into the building and made a quick job eliminating the zombies from the first 3 floors of the building to let the survivors enter. This would only take them 10 to 20 minutes, as the library was not usually a crowded place. Less so on days when the internet had everything that was needed. While the 2 of them were in charge of the temporary shelter in which the survivors would stay when the stronger ones went deeper into the mutant forest to try to open an exit to the outside world, Shangguan Bingshui, Liang Peng, Kai Jingyi, who were currently the 3 strongest of the group, stayed behind to protect approximately 300 survivors. As for the remaining few more than 100, they were currently carrying out a different task under the guidance of Fu Xiefeng and Zhongde. In front of the group of survivors who were walking densely packed together to lessen the possibilities of death or infection in case a mutated creature or zombie appeared, Fu Xiefeng and Zhongde were advancing silently while cautiously observing the surroundings. Because they were both men of few words, regardless of their motives, and due to the danger of the environment, neither of them tried to initiate a conversation and simply walked in silence. After walking for about 5 minutes, Zhongde stopped and while observing the surroundings noted, "I think this place should be fine." Fu Xiefeng also stopped, and the survivors walking a few steps behind immediately stopped as well. He carefully observed the surroundings and noticed that the green grass that was neatly clipped in the past was now so tall that it passed his knees. "All right." Fu Xiefeng nodded, still feeling a little depressed about missing the opportunity that Bai Zemin presented to him yesterday. Zhongde looked at him and tapped him on the shoulder as he said with a rare smile, "Why the long face? Has Big Brother Bai treated us unkindly? From the time we started following him, he not just gave us the best food, but also gave us the right to express our ideas, opinions, and even continues to give us the opportunity to become stronger by giving us valuable treasures. I believe that as long as we follow him honestly, we can have a better future and the opportunities to become stronger will come naturally." Fu Xiefeng was surprised, as this was the first time he heard Zhongde speak so many words at the same time. However, his companion's words lightened his pessimistic mood, and he nodded firmly. "You are right. We just have to follow in his footsteps, and he will lead the way as he has always done so far." Zhongde nodded silently and raised a thumbs up at him. Neither of them was dumb, or else they wouldn't have been able to get into a university as prestigious as this one. Moreover, their adaptability was also higher than that of normal survivors, allowing them to notice things that others might overlook. Therefore, Both Fu Xiefeng and Zhongde knew that as long as Bai Zemin did not die suddenly, he was destined to achieve great feats in this new world. Currently, Fu Xiefeng was level 15 and Zhongde level 13. However, even at this point, they could not even see Bai Zemin's back. They both knew that with their current stats, even facing a few dozen people was no challenge at all, yet neither of them could even comprehend Bai Zemin's strength. They both knew that the world had changed and society would never be the same again. Even if humans regained control of the world, things could not go back to the way they were. New powers would arise, and with the possibility of evolving, the government, military forces, everything would be restructured. The world was infinitely more dangerous than in the past. However, opportunities came hand in hand with danger. Zhongde and Fu Xiefeng had decided to change their destinies and, in case they were still alive, those of their families as well. How? Betting everything on Bai Zemin. Since he had managed to rise to such an extent so quickly and was even able to terminate first-order existences so easily, Bai Zemin's future would be resplendent, and as part of the initial group of his followers, Zhongde and Fu Xiefeng, as well as their loved ones, would naturally be able to take a small part of that resplendence. Shall we begin? Fu Xiefeng looked at Zhongde and asked with a somewhat excited smile. The corner of Zhongde's mouth twitched a couple of times, but he still nodded. Let's begin. Fu Xiefeng turned around and, looking at the survivors, tried to speak in an authoritative tone, start spreading the oil and gasoline on the nearby plants and grass. Remember not to go too deep and only focus on the outer perimeter. Little by little, that young man, with little self-confidence, was beginning to acquire some attitude. Thanks to the wonderful opportunity provided by Zemin back then, Fu Xiefeng was gradually becoming a person worthy of leadership. This was a great contrast if compared to his past self, who was shy and reserved to the level that even having a normal conversation was difficult for him. The survivors nodded and began to move with careful steps. These 100 were mostly men, and there were only a few women among them. Each had been carefully chosen the day before, and all were brave enough to face danger indirectly. Fighting was still out of the question, but if it was a matter of taking a little risk without having to face any mutated creatures, they were still okay. That was precisely why these 100 or so survivors dared to come to this dangerous place. Each survivor carried a 2-liter bottle, and a few of them carried 5-liter jerry cans filled to the brim. The bottles contained oil, and the jerry cans contained gasoline that had been extracted from the cars parked in the subway parking lot the day before. Although it was a shame to have to waste a resource like fuel, everyone knew that the plan devised by the group's leaders was the best option to wipe everything out. The survivors moved carefully and started pouring the oil and gasoline everywhere. Some fallen tree trunks or branches, dry or dead leaves, on the grass, on some bushes, basically everything in the outer perimeter of the area where the survivors had been sprayed with flammable substance. Right? Step number 1 was to set the forest on fire. Although it was not possible to go any deeper since the survivors would be slaughtered without even knowing how they died, after listening to Chun He's explanation, some realized that the reason why the first-order creatures did not come out of the forest was probably to protect that strange silkworm-like monster. In fact, the only reason why the platinum ape had been so furious the day before and had left the forest and even ignored Shangwan Bing Shui, focusing its attention solely on Chun He, was because the beast was sleeping when he secretly tried to kill it with an arrow imbued with magic into its chest a short distance from its heart. Otherwise, it was unlikely that the platinum ape would leave the center of the forest. As for the rest of the first-order creatures leaving the forest, Bai Zemin and the rest couldn't be sure, but it was probably because they were on the outer perimeter rather than the center. Done! Fu Xiefeng exclaimed quietly as he gestured for the survivors to return. Let's report back. Zhongde looked at the mutated forest one last time before turning around and starting to walk back the way they had come. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. At the top of a 5-story building directly across from where the group of 100 survivors had sprayed the oil and gasoline, Bai Zemin stood silently as he gazed at the mutated forest stretching as far as the eye could see. The gentle breeze of wind that caressed his face carried the strong smell of fuel that was intoxicating, but in a way also had a touch of attraction in it, constantly reminding him of what he should do next. Beside him, Lilith was sitting up in the midair with one leg crossed over the knee of the other and lazily resting her face on one hand. However, though she looked casual, if one paid special attention to her striking red eyes, one could easily notice the glint of excitement and exhilaration that was constantly flickering like a naughty child. "So, will you do it now?" Lilith asked curiously. Bai Zemin nodded without averting his gaze and said slowly, "Currently, I did everything I could do. I improved my control over mana. I also learned to get a better control over the amount of magic I can use, and I even trained for more than 15 hours every day, practically without a break, for 3 whole days with my blood manipulation." He paused and closed his eyes, trying to feel the mana around him as he said in a low voice, "I even devised an unstoppable attack. My strongest attack at this point. If I can't kill a first-order existence with my bare hands after all this, then I might as well start thinking that such a task really is impossible to accomplish, and this unknown entity called Soul Record is insane. RN, well, I'm sure you'll be able to do it." Lilith rolled a lock of her dark hair on her index finger and said with a smile, "Your growth so far has been the most terrifying, but at the same time wonderful, I have ever seen. If you can't make it, then no one can." Bai Zemin chuckled and did not comment on it. In fact, even if Lilith did not say those words, he was 99.9% confident that his attack would definitely succeed in claiming the life of his enemy. As for the remaining 0.1%, that was reserved for contingencies beyond what the current him could handle. Soon after, Bai Zemin slowly opened his eyes and looked down the building. There, Shengwan Bing Shui was coming out from inside the facility along with Chun He and Liang Peng. They seemed to be discussing the second phase of the plan. As if sensing his gaze, Shengwan Bing Shui stopped the conversation and looked up. Her indifferent sky-colored eyes met a pair of dark and cold eyes, like a winter night. Without saying anything, Shengwan Bing Shui started walking towards the mutated forest. On the other hand, Chun-Yi jumped a couple of times and climbed onto a building next to Bai Zemin's before aiming his preloaded crossbow toward the forest. As for the burly Liang Peng, he held tightly to his big hammer and planted both feet firmly on the ground as he narrowed his eyes towards the unfamiliar but danger-ridden forest. Before Shengwan Bing Shui got too far away, Bai Zemin shouted loudly, "Hey, Shengwan Bing Shui!" She stopped and half turned around to look at him just in time to see him throw something at her. With a nimble and easy movement, the object he threw was caught by her. After seeing what it was, her small mouth opened slightly, and her indifferent eyes, for the first time in a long time, had a wavelength of emotions that even she herself couldn't comprehend. "I'll lend it to you. When you come back, you get it back to me." Bai Zemin's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. In the end, she looked back toward the top of the building and said the first word that came to her mind, "Thank you." Bai Zemin nodded and smiled casually as he said, "I'm relying on you." Chun-He and Liang Peng observed the strange interaction between Bai Zemin and Shengwan Bing Shui, but had no idea what was going on or why she had thanked him. However, due to the fact that they were on high alert for what was about to happen, neither of them dared to even look away from the mutated forest. After saying words of thanks for the first time in so long that even she could not remember when it had been the last time, Shengwan Bing Shui put away the object that Bai Zemin had given her carefully and marched into the mutated forest alone. Bai Zemin looked at her thin, small back that seemed as fragile as a glass window, slowly disappearing from his sight. Then he knelt down on his left knee and took out 2 bottles of blazing beetle's blood from his backpack. He carefully scattered the blood in front of him until a bright red pool formed, and then closed his eyes. Although he looked calm on the outside, his mind was working overtime, imagining a spear as he began to move the mana inside his body, this time without worrying about saving. At the same time as his mana began to be consumed at astonishing speeds, Bai Zemin began to use his magic to control as much magical power as possible, while the image of the best possible spear shone in his mind. The tip had to be sharp to be able to pierce through any defense and destroy any impediment. The sheath to be sturdy enough to not be easily destroyed by the enemy. To be easy to hold for throwing, but difficult to withdraw. Every line of the weapon flickered in his mind as Bai Zemin imagined himself wielding a hammer and pounding metal on an anvil using fire at high temperatures. Even without the tools, with magic and mana, he could create objects by adding his blood manipulation. While it wasn't the same, creation was still creation. The blood on the ground glowed crimson, and slowly a spear with 3 blades began to take shape. The blood solidified. Strange lines similar to engravings began to appear on the pulley, and an end in a shape similar to a poker card trefoil. What Bai Zemin was creating was not a normal spear, it was specifically a trident. His face began to pale, and beads of sweat began to form on his forehead as his 273 mana points ran wildly outward, as if a water dam had broken. If Bai Zemin's plan was successful, then there was no need to hold anything back, as he would be rewarded with far more. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Meanwhile, Shangwan Bing Shui advanced through the mutated forest, moving deeper and deeper, closer and closer to the center of the place. The first thing she noticed was the purity of the air around her. The air was so pure that she could feel as if her lungs were being purified of all the polluted air she had breathed throughout her life. However, she soon realized that what she was breathing was not exactly the same air she had known since birth. Mana! Such a thought flashed in her mind as she kept running deeper. The air was charged with mana, and the closer she got to the center, the denser the amount of mana became. If the air outside this place, the air breathed by humans, was a composition of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, neon, helium, and others, then the air Shangwan Bing Shui was breathing in right now also contained mana as its main component. Due to her agile speed, Shangwan Bing Shui was not paying attention to the beauty of the place, or she would be surprised to notice how harmonious everything around her looked. A few butterflies the size of basins flapped their wings gently, while bees the size of adult human fists rested comfortably on flowers that reached almost a meter in height. There were even a few dogs sleeping peacefully with a few mutated cats beside them. They all seemed to have made a tactical agreement not to fight, and instead were concentrating on absorbing as much mana as possible even while they slept. About a minute later, Shangwan Bing Shui could not help but stagger slightly, and her face changed completely as she realized that her blood began to slowly boil as if a volcano was about to erupt, and she felt like vomiting due to the sudden discomfort. The feeling was similar to the one she felt during the first day of the apocalypse, just seconds before that strange message flashed in the retina of her eyes, signaling the beginning of a new era. Humans were different from animals, bugs, or plants. Humans could not just casually absorb the mana of the surroundings at will, and that was precisely the reason why everyone had a small part of the world's mana within their soul. If that amount went beyond what was bearable by the user's soul, zombie-like mutations would begin to appear as the body would try to adapt to the change as best and as quickly as possible to avoid total death. That was what she was experiencing at the moment. She stopped breathing hurriedly to substantially slow down mana's absorption and pushed her speed to the limit. Although Shangwan Bing Shui was more focused on the path of magic, her melee prowess was by no means deficient. Even before the appearance of a soul record on Earth, she was already a genius when it came to martial arts, and thus she possessed the unranked passive skill level 3 combat expert. Moreover, every time she leveled up, she added both points to agility. As for the reason, perhaps only she knew exactly. The reality was that she had currently reached level 24 the day before after acquiring a large amount of soul power from the Platinum Ape, and was currently close to being able to start her first real evolution. Therefore, 48 agility points came from leveling up alone, currently reaching 109 points in total thanks to collaborating in the defeat and slaughter of 2 first-order existences, as well as her normal-grade treasure boots. While she could not compare to Bai Zemin, who had almost 130 agility points, even though he still had 32 status points reserved and a lot of soul power to be absorbed due to being stuck at level 25, her agility was outstanding compared to most. A few seconds later, she finally arrived at what seemed to be the center of the place, and even with her calmness, she couldn't help but be terrified at the sight. At that time, Chenny probably hadn't had time to look at the situation around him cautiously, or else he wouldn't have said that there should be at most a dozen first-order creatures. Just by looking around a couple of times, Shengwan Bing Shui had already counted more than 20. After absorbing the soul power of the platinum ape, Shengwan Bing Shui had received a huge boost in her stats. Precisely because of that, she was confident in fighting one-on-one and killing a first-order creature below level 45. However, if they all joined forces to attack her and manage to surround her, then she wouldn't even be able to resist for a second before being killed. Shengwan Bing Shui quickly hid behind a giant tree beside her and crouched down as she carefully observed the scene before her eyes in wonder. In the center of what appeared to be a clear patch of grass was a small lake of crystal clear water. A lake that, if she remembered correctly, was only a small island where there was a small rose and tulip garden. Next to the lake, there were at least 30 or 40 beasts of all kinds. Some of them had several legs, some others were standing on 2 legs, and others were just casually crawling on the ground. Strange-looking snakes whose bodies stretched almost 15 meters, giant elephant beetles, fat bees measuring more than 30 centimeters, dogs, cats, all kinds of creatures were there without a fight. Even though they occasionally looked at each other with fighting desire and eyes filled with murderous intent, none of them took the first bite. Therefore, the place was in peaceful silence where the sound of an occasional growl or the rippling water of the lake was the only thing that could be heard along with the wind blowing through the treetops. Suddenly, a strange creature that was surrounded by several other first-order creatures slowly crawled from its position to the shore of the lake. The other first-order creatures began to move carefully, allowing the strange creature to pass, but everyone's eyes remained fixed on the beast as if they were its guardians or its captors, and feared it would slip out of their sight. Shengwan Bing Shui could not help but feel a surge of disgust when she finally caught a glimpse of the appearance of the creature, which Chun-He had described the day before. The creature was actually a huge worm. Its more than 3-meter-long body left a trail of disgusting-looking sticky liquid every time it crawled everywhere. Its stomach moved strangely as if there were millions of living objects moving inside it. For a moment, Shengwan Bing Shui had thought that perhaps the huge worm was pregnant and perhaps about to give birth. However, she soon realized that this was not the case. The giant worm was extremely slow, so even though it was relatively close to the shore, it still took a couple of seconds for it to reach the water to start drinking. After a few gulps, the giant worm suddenly stopped its movements, and its mouth opened wide, revealing a terrifying-looking set of teeth inside. Howl! The creature let out a high-pitched howl that caused ripples and raised some waves in the previously calm lake. The previously calm forest suddenly became agitated, and Shengwan Bing Shui thought she had been discovered. However, soon everything calmed down again, and what happened next was something she could never forget. The giant worm's puffed-up stomach began to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye as a thick cloud of sapphire-colored air came out of the creature's mouth. The sapphire-colored air soon spread to the surrounding area and began to blend in with the forest. The trees began to become more alive, the plants began to grow slowly, and the animals and insects began to suck in deeply. Mana! Shengwan Bing Shui's eyes lit up, and she finally understood everything, solving the mystery that none of them could solve before. Why were there so many first-order creatures in this place? How was it possible that the small front garden of the university suddenly turned into a forest that looked like something out of a prehistoric movie? Why weren't all these monsters fighting each other to evolve? It was all caused by that giant worm. Apparently, the giant worm had the ability to create and produce mana inside its body to evolve. However, the amount was so much that it had no choice but to release much of it or else it would die. The other beasts simply took advantage of the situation and began to slowly grow. Shengwan Bing Shui suddenly felt a bad premonition and hurriedly turned around. Her expression froze as she saw what seemed to be hundreds of tiny leeches crawling towards her and slowly surrounding her. If she fought the leeches naturally, she could kill them all easily. However, if she fought here, she would attract the attention of the other creatures, and that wasn't exactly part of the plan. In Epsilon, I have no choice. She gritted her teeth and shot out of her hiding place. Her speed burst into full gear, making wonderful use of all her agility, and in no time, she had almost completely closed the distance between her and the lake. However, the First Order creatures noticed her and began to move while roaring ferociously. The synchronized roars of dozens of First Order existences were so terrifying that even an unnatural sound wave shot out towards her. Because Shangwan Bingshui was focused on reaching her target, she could not afford to stop to defend herself or avoid the attack, because if she did that, she knew that the entire previously devised plan would fail. Therefore, she could only continue to move forward independently. Ugh! Her face turned slightly pale, and her steps faltered for a moment, giving her a frail and pitiful appearance. However, she endured the dizziness she felt and bit her lips fiercely. Her cold eyes had a look of resolve, and she continued to charge forward. Swoosh! Suddenly the wind seemed to be cut in two by an object moving at high speed, and Shangwan Bingshui felt a horrifying pressure from her back. However, she ignored that attack and continued forward without stopping. What was behind her was a snake that was almost 20 meters long and was currently swinging its heavy tail at her. If she was hit directly by that attack, even if she survived, it was unlikely that she would be able to get up for quite a while. However, just as she was about to be whipped, a small, ragged-looking bronze bell came out of the pocket of her combat robe and floated above her head, releasing a yellow glow that soon surrounded her completely. Bang! The 1-meter-thick tail ferociously slammed into the yellow barrier, creating a thunderous explosion that echoed throughout the forest. The barrier shuddered slightly, and the yellow glow dimmed a little. However, that was all. Shangwan Bingshui continued to move forward without being injured in any way and had soon left behind the snake that was the fastest creature close to her. This small bell was precisely the object that Bai Zemin had given her just before she entered the mutated forest. It was his magic gray treasure that he had acquired when he killed his First Order beast, and that treasure had saved her life, preventing the plan from collapsing and making everything more dangerous. Due to her speed and lightness, Shangwan Bingshui sprinted a few meters above the water of the lake, and just before she started to submerge, the water under her feet froze into small ice plaques. She stopped her footsteps abruptly and kicked hard as she made a full 360-degree turn. A wave of water several meters high rose as consequence, and before the wave of water fell on the giant worm, Shangwan Bingshui pointed her magic wand and shouted, "Freeze!" A cloud of frost came out from the tip of the wand, and she fed it with her own mana. When the frost cloud touched the giant wave of water, it froze it completely, creating a beautiful ice sculpture almost 20 meters high. Moreover, the most impressive thing was that apart from the beauty of the ice wave, it was curiously pointed at the giant worm that was howling furiously at her. At this point, she had already done her best to pinpoint the main target that needed to be eliminated, thus fulfilling her main part in this whole business. "Now it's your turn to play your part, Bai Zemin," Shangwan Bingshui muttered as she ran in the opposite direction, being fervently pursued by the snake that had attacked her earlier and was now crawling through the water as it hissed with its tongue and glared fiercely at her. But she was not intimidated, and on the contrary, making use of the lake water, Shangwan Bingshui made dozens of ice pikes and began to attack the snake as she retreated. As Shangwan Bingshui went into the mutated forest to fulfill her most important part of the whole plan that had been worked out for part of the evening and most of the night, the atmosphere outside the forest was considerably quiet. The survivors were in the library several streets away, anxiously awaiting the triumphant return of the four main leaders of the group. While Fu Xiefeng, Kai Jingyi, Zhongde, and Kong Lan had stayed with the survivors to protect them, since with their current strength they had no chance against a First Order beast. They all knew that if Bai Zemin, Shangwan Bingshui, Chun He, and Liang Peng were defeated, then it was extremely improbable that the rest would be able to survive. After all, if even the four of them could not defeat the beasts in the forest, then it was only a matter of time before they were all devoured, since they would have no way to safely leave the university. On the other hand, Chun He and Liang Peng held on to their weapons tightly, while their eyes remained fixed and focused on the trees and bushes several meters away. If a mutated animal or insect appeared, they were both prepared to attack immediately. Unlike the two of them, Bai Zemin was apparently more relaxed. Standing on top of one of the tallest buildings in the area, he stared ahead for several seconds in silence before asking in a low voice, "So, you're sure it's not a second-order beast, right?" Lilith chuckled and said lightly, "I already told you it's not. The creature inside that forest has a strange ability, but it's only at the top of the first order. It hasn't been able to advance yet, but if it's left as it is, then it could be problematic in the future." Bai Zemin secretly sighed in relief. As long as his enemy was not in the second order, even if it was a level 49 or 51st order existence, he was confident of coming out victorious regardless of what kind of skill his enemy had. What a pity! If only the death of that platinum ape yesterday had counted at this point, I might have successfully evolved to first order by now. He couldn't help but scratch his head with his free hand and sighed a little regretfully. You think the soul record is that simple? Lilith couldn't help but roll her eyes charmingly and pointed out, countless beings tried to circumvent the soul record and tried to explore or find some sort of loophole when it came to fulfilling evolutionary requirements, but they all failed miserably. Tell me more about it, please. Bai Zemin's ears perked up immediately, and he felt curious about the story. Whenever the soul record presents an evolution requirement, that requirement must be completed correctly and only by the person who wishes to evolve. Lilith responded briefly but concisely. Outside help is not allowed in any way. Also, if you use weapons of mass destruction or long-range weapons that you did not create with your own hands, you are likely to fail as well. Bai Zemin frowned and said hesitantly this. So, let's say I shoot a first-order creature in the head. Ha ha ha. Lilith couldn't help but laugh. She looked at him with amusement and questioned, "You think mana, an energy capable of forcing all existences to evolve or die, is that simple?" Bai Zemin, except against zombies or other animals without evolving properly, normal firearms do not have the power to pierce the natural mana surrounding a first-order beast. To kill one, you'll probably need missiles or battle tanks. Maybe heavy machine guns will also do the trick. In fact, if you had used a firearm to kill your first enemy back then, there is a possibility that the soul record would deny you the loser's soul power, depending on the circumstances. Lilith shrugged her shoulders, and her voice was a bit bitter before concluding. As for how this works, don't ask me. The soul record is an entity that is still being studied even to this day. Bai Zemin couldn't help but gasp when he heard this, and his eyes trembled with fear. Humans were weak by nature, and most of them didn't even have the courage to fight. If firearms lost their effect, then how was humanity going to survive this apocalypse? As if she knew his thoughts, she reassured him with her soft voice. But don't worry too much. First-order creatures are not so normal since it's only been 11 days since the soul record reached this galaxy. As for second-order, let's hope there aren't any yet, or humanity in that area would be annihilated unless they had truly outstanding military might. Bai Zemin smiled bitterly and shook his head. He only knew the world inside this university. How was he to know the situation outside? The only thing he hoped was that his loved ones were otherwise. He didn't even want to think about that. At least now he knew that the soul record was not an entity to be played with casually, although it was pretty obvious if he thought about it more carefully. After all, just like Lilith said before, how could an entity capable of causing so many changes in the blink of an eye be simple? Bees. It was probably for the reasons Lilith mentioned earlier that those driving the buses did not receive any experience, even though they killed several zombies by crushing them mercilessly. As Bai Zemin was lost in thought, a terrifying howl coming from inside the mutated forest caused his face to change, and his expression turned serious. "It's finally starting," he muttered as he raised the blood trident that glowed like a ruby over his shoulder, leaned his arm as far back as possible, and used blood manipulation on himself, focusing all his power and ability to perform a single strike. With his right foot behind and his left foot forward, Bai Zemin leaned his body slightly backward. His bright eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of frost as he looked up slightly in search of the accorded signal. Bang! An explosion echoed from within the mutated forest, and soon after a wave of water more than 20 meters high rose into the sky. However, under the gaze of the three men present, the water wave moved in a strange direction before freezing into an ice statue. The corner of Bai Zemin's mouth curved upward slightly, and he could not help but praise, "What a beautiful sculpture." The right foot behind him suddenly stepped forward, overtaking the left foot by a wide margin, and the muscles of his right arm expanded to the maximum extent possible. Without delay, his right arm became like a whip that shot forward at full speed, and after reaching its maximum extension, he released his grip on the blood trident. A split second before the blood trident left his hand, the blazing ring on his finger glowed, and immediately a crimson radiance surrounded the trident covered by a layer of mana, raising the temperature of the surroundings to impressive heights. However, that was not all. Bang! The hurricane necklace resting on Bai Zemin's chest shone with a green glow, and a tornado of wind perpendicular to the ground shot forward, reaching the blood trident surrounded by crimson flames in less than a second. Bang! With the strong wind impulse added to the great force with which Bai Zemin had launched it, the blood trident containing over 240 mana points broke the sound barrier, disappearing from everyone's sight and leaving several mock cones behind. You have learned the third order active skill, Crimson Blood Judgment, level 5. Inside the forest, Shangwan Bing Shui was engaged in a death match with the first order mutated snake. In her left hand was the magic wand, boosting her mana and magic stats by a large margin. In her right hand was an ice sword that had cost over 50% of her mana to make. Her beautiful angelic face was quite pale, but her eyes were as cold as the sword she wielded. Although the mutated snake scales were incredibly tough, and Shangwan Bing Shui could not pierce them, her physical and magical attacks contained a large amount of freezing power inside, so every swing of her sword, or every time she crafted different ice weapons to attack a part of the snake's body over 20 meters long, was frozen. The mutated snake hissed, and its bloodshot eyes looked at its enemy with murderous intent. Its body shook, and the layers of ice that were beginning to form broke into countless pieces that slowly fell to the ground. However, its blood was slowly beginning to cool, and its movements were becoming increasingly stiff. Shangwan Bing Shui suddenly felt overwhelming danger of death after seeing how the mutated snake had its maw wide open. She didn't even think about it for a second, as she immediately erected a thick wall of ice several meters high between her and the creature. A green cloud came out from inside the mutated snake's mouth a second later and clashed against the ice wall. The seemingly super sturdy ice wall began to erode at astonishing speeds visible to the naked eye. Bang! Suddenly, there was a powerful explosion a few kilometers away, and the next thing Shangwan Bing Shui could see out of the corner of her was a bright crimson flash approaching at speeds impossible for her to comprehend. Bang! Before she could even comprehend what was happening, and after a huge blast that shook the earth slightly, the mutated forest began to burn fiercely, and the beast within began to howl and roar in anger and pain as the flames raged mercilessly. The mutated snake was distracted for a moment and stopped its skill. The beast seemed to notice something wrong and quickly began to slither towards the lake where the rest of the first order monsters were. Swoosh! Swoosh! Followed by two whistles of wind. Two ice spears pierced the beast's two eyes crudely. The mutated snake stopped dead in its tracks and began to shake its body all over the place in pain. Shangwan Bing Shui hurriedly backed away while keeping her gaze fixed on the beast. The snake that was over 20 meters long slammed into some trees that were on fire in the process of constantly writhing and knocked them down with ease. She knew the crimson flames would soon reach her position, but instead of retreating, she decided to rely on the bronze bell and charged forward, launching attack after attack at the now sightless first-order creature. As the victory drew closer and closer, she could not help but marvel and be frightened by the earlier attack. She had no idea what it was that Bai Zemin had fired before, but the destructive power of that attack did not lose in the slightest to the destruction that a couple of missiles could cause. However, she knew there were no missiles here, let alone ways to use them, even if there were. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Third order active skill? Bai Zemin's mind rushed at the speed of light as he saw the green message flashing across his retina at the same time as he marveled at the trail of crimson fire blazing in the sky. However, circumstances did not allow him to focus too much as a flurry of green-lettered messages began flashing in his retina one after another. Critical hit. Bai Zemin's lips curved upward. His face pale from all the mana consumption recovered, as if by magic, and he could feel himself becoming terrifyingly much stronger than before. He had succeeded. He had completed a task that had been given to him alone in all recorded history, as he was the only person with the qualifications to fulfill it. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Mana, Embryo, level 48. Kill unranked enemies using blood manipulation with a single attack. 100 out of 100. Kill First Order enemy using blood manipulation on yourself. 2 halves. Kill First Order enemy with a single attack using blood manipulation on yourself. 1/1. You have successfully evolved to First Order and have become Blood Berserker. Attack power increases by 20% when using axes, spears, swords, maces, or bare hands. Your blood attacks become 20% more effective. When facing more powerful enemies, your attack power increases by 20%. B. You have learned Second Order passive skill Blood will level 5. You have reached level 31 and get 12 status points to distribute freely. All soul power accumulated during the evolution process has been calculated. You get additional stats: Strength plus 65, Agility plus 43, Stamina plus 43, Magic plus 40, Health plus 35, Mana plus 30. You have fulfilled the necessary requirements to evolve 2 skills. You have received the title One Hit to Kill. After calculating the soul power of the Shadow Tiger, the Platinum Ape, the Mana Embryo, as well as that of a few thousand zombies, insects, and mutated animals, Bai Zemin obtained a stat boost of approximately 30% compared to his previous one before evolving. Because he had already hunted some First-Order creatures, the additional stats he obtained from enemies within that category gradually became less as his own soul power began to adapt to that range of evolution. In fact, now that he had reached the First Order, it was likely that the soul power he obtained from such enemies would become even thinner as he was also within the same category unlike in the past. However, a boost of approximately 30% in overall strength was something fearsome. Not to mention that he was currently past level 30 and had several tens of status points reserved for times of crisis. The number of green-lettered messages flashing across his retina were too many, so Bai Zemin could not pay attention to them all at the moment as the battle had only just begun. After all he had done was to kill the central problem that had been marked with masterful accuracy by Shangguan Bingshui, but there were still more enemies left inside the forest. But none of that mattered at the moment. Bai Zemin could read in careful detail when all this was over once and for all, because the most important thing was that he had finally leveled up, fully recovering to his maximum and going even higher. The level up that occurred in the process of the wall, blocking his growth, became completely ragged, and that was all that mattered. His path was finally clear once again, and he didn't have to worry about stagnating. Roar! The thunderous roars of dozens of mutated monsters echoed everywhere as the mutated forest began to burn increasingly out of control, fueled by the wind from the previous hurricane, as well as the gasoline and infamous oil that had been spread by the group, led by Fu Xiefeng and Zhonde earlier. Although Bai Zemin's previous attack, which transformed into a skill called Crimson Blood Judgment, had not come into direct contact with the forest floor, the temperature of the flame from the blazing ring propelled by the strong tornado from the hurricane necklace had enough power to ignite the grass several meters below. When the heat from the flame came in contact with the gasoline and highly flammable oil spread earlier, the ground automatically began to burn. In addition, due to the wind from the hurricane, all the flames began to spread southward, slowly burning the forest and getting closer and closer to the center. Suddenly, the ground began to shake and the earth rumbled as if an earthquake was shaking the world. However, It was clear to Bai Zemin and the other two men present that what caused the rumbling was not an earthquake. Roar! A giant elephant beetle roared with its head held high as it ran in a straight line directly toward the buildings. Its body was surrounded by yellow flames that protected it from the crimson flames. However, the creature was obviously expending a lot of mana to keep its skill active at all times. Following right behind the giant elephant beetle, two mutated dogs whose fur looked like an iron plate, two black-furred tigers, three green-spotted cats, five huge snakes that were even bigger than a normal python before the apocalypse, and a fat bee with a 2-meter stinger were rapidly approaching, carrying murderous intent with bloodshot eyes. The blood disappeared from Chun He and Liang Peng's faces at the sight of such a monstrous lineup of evolved beasts. "It's the end." Liang Peng couldn't help but exclaim as he tightened his grip on his hammer and prepared to fight to the death. Being the slowest of the three, Liang Peng knew that running away was an impossibility for him, so he had no choice but to fight whether he wanted to or not. On the other hand, Chun He was not only scared by the sight, but also for Shangwan Bing Shui. Did something happen to her? Considering the number of beasts that came out of the forest, the chances of her surviving were not very high. Soon we'll join up again, he thought as he raised his crossbow and aimed at the flying bee with eyes filled with sadness. In the midst of all this atmosphere, only Bai Zemin had an indifferent expression. He looked at the First Order blazing beetle and couldn't help but blank out for a split second, remembering his battle to the death against a creature of the same type. "Let me see how strong I've become," he muttered under his breath and narrowed his eyes as he placed one foot on the edge of the building before lunging forward with all his might. Bang! The edge of the building's concrete roof tore into pieces, and Bai Zemin transformed into a shadow hard to notice by the naked eye. Still in the air and taking advantage of gravity's momentum, Bai Zemin made a complete turn and while holding on to the Xin Yuan sword slashed downward. Without skill and without any elegant style, pure strength and speed. Boom! The speed of the blazing beetle was not particularly fast, and even back then Bai Zemin managed to win precisely by making use of his superior agility, not to mention now that he had become countless times stronger. The First Order beast did not even understand the situation, and by the time it realized what was happening, it was already too late. The Xin Yuan sword, a treasure capable of piercing through the defenses of almost any creature below level 40, might have difficulty piercing through the blazing beetle's defenses in normal times. After all, it was a mostly defensive beast. However, the current Bai Zemin was capable of raising the sword's power to new heights due to his strength. His attack struck firmly right on top of the giant horn, causing a thunderous explosion. His eyes, filled with murderous intent, met the beast's disbelieving gaze for a moment before something terrifying happened. Crack! 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 Bang! Small-sized cracks began to appear from the point of impact before spreading throughout the horn. However, that was not all. Roar! The fiery beetle's eyes quivered in shock, and it staggered back several steps as it roared in pain. Not because of the loss of its main weapon, but because its shell was cracking as well. Under the surprised gaze of the two men behind, cracks spread across the entire metal armor of the blazing beetle before bursting into pieces. The creature roared again in pain, and the yellow flames that belonged to it were extinguished as crimson flames were expelled by the shockwave of the previous attack. R.A. Flash! There was a sharp flash, and the next instant the roars of the blazing beetle came to a complete stop. Right in the center of the beast's head appeared a red line from which blood began to flow slowly. Splash! The head split in two and blood splattered everywhere, staining the cracked ground and attracting the attention of the other First Order creatures that were using the blazing beetle as a front charge to escape the crimson flames setting the forest ablaze. You have acquired the soul power of the First Order blazing beetle level 31. Mana plus 24, magic plus 15, health plus 12, stamina plus 8, strength plus 5. Standing over the now collapsed body of the blazing beetle, Bai Zemin's gaze was indifferent, and he couldn't help but sigh. Who would have thought that a little over a week ago, he had almost been killed by a monster of the same type he had just slain so easily? Back then, Bai Zemin was on the verge of death countless times, and even though he won, it was a miserable victory. Moreover, something that surprised him was that he also received another message. Blood will activated. For the next 5 minutes, increase your overall attack power by 1% for each enemy killed and 0.1% for each surrounding enemy alive up to a maximum of 50%. Current status, 2.3%/50%. Too bad. He didn't have time to study things too much since he was in the middle of a battlefield. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Suddenly the wind swooshed, and Bai Zemin couldn't help but let his expression change slightly. Without delay, he hurriedly jumped forward, barely escaping from danger. Right at the place where he was standing before, several green orbs struck the flesh of the blazing beetle, and under Bai Zemin's astonished gaze the flesh began to be corroded quickly. With narrowed eyes, he saw the 5 snakes looking at him coldly. A strange green liquid was still coming out of their mouths, and every time a drop reached the ground the earth steamed, and small holes formed. Bai Zemin identified the snakes as a dangerous target and quickly charged forward. The snakes were not idle either, as they began to bombard him, spitting acid-laden green orbs. Bai Zemin did not dare to take the giant mutated snake's attacks head-on, as he was not confident that his full coat would be able to withstand the acid corrosion, so he quickly began to move in a zigzagging motion. Bang, 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 bang. The 5 mutated snakes blasted acidic orbs non-stop at Bai Zemin. If just one of those orbs hit him, even with his full coat, he would not necessarily be able to escape unscathed, and if he received a direct attack on his hands, feet, or worse yet his head, then that part of his body would undoubtedly begin to corrode. However, for such a thing to happen, the mutant snakes needed to somehow be able to match Bai Zemin's agility, or at least be able to see his movements somewhat in advance. Bai Zemin's body flashed across the battlefield like a ghost as he skillfully dodged the acidic orbs flying in his direction. Trying to close the distance between him and the 5 far-off mutant snakes he had identified as the greatest present danger to his life. With nearly 17 times the speed of a normal human before the apocalypse, a few hundred meters was a distance he could close in a couple of blinks. However, the mutated snakes were not his only enemy, and activating blood manipulation from so far away would not give him the result he was looking for. Swoosh! Suddenly, one of the 2 shadow tigers charged forward and lunged at him with its mouth wide open, revealing sharp teeth with dried bloodstains on the inside. Bai Zemin advanced instead of retreating and slashed with his sword diagonally. A split second later, after a sharp flash where the shadow tiger and he crossed paths, the beast's head came off its body cleanly and rolled on the ground as blood splattered everywhere. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Shadow Tiger, level 37. You have acquired plus 17 agility, plus 15 stamina, plus 10 strength, plus 6 health. You have reached level 32. You gain 2 status points to distribute freely. Blood will, 3.2%/50%. Not even a second had passed when Bai Zemin saw out of the corner of his eye the other First Order Shadow Tiger, less than a meter away. The mutated tigers were incredibly fast, and in this position, it was impossible for him to move in time to defend or dodge. However, roar! The First Order Shadow Tiger roared painfully as more than a dozen blood spears rose up from the blood of the dead Shadow Tiger, piercing its body all over from the bottom up and stopping it in midair. The beast did not manage to give a second roar of pain as Bai Zemin turned 360 degrees and decapitated it with ease, sending its head flying into the air. You have received the soul power of First Order Shadow Tiger, level 38. You have acquired agility plus 10, stamina plus 6, strength plus 4, health plus 1. You have reached level 33. You gain 2, blood will, 4.1%/50%. Without delay, Bai Zemin jumped to the side to evade the snake's attacks while his mind quickly processed the previous mana expenditure. Approximately 15 blood spears had consumed about 40 mana points. If it were in the past, the amount would probably be double or more, proving how useful his previous training had been. If Bai Zemin had trained alone without enemies, the results would not be as good as they were currently. Ono, F***CK. It had only been less than 5 seconds since Bai Zemin had engaged in combat with the mutated first-order beasts, but 3 of them had already been killed. Even a naturally well-spoken Chun, he couldn't help but curse. That kind of power. It was simply insane. The terrifying evolved beasts in his hands seemed to be as weak as a newborn puppy. Chun raised his crossbow, and instead of shooting at the giant bee, he aimed at the 5 snakes slithering all over the battlefield. He was smart enough to know that he did not have the ability to pierce through those glowing scales. Therefore, he aimed for the eyes. Since the mutated snakes were the biggest problem, then Chun half closed his eyes and relaxed his breathing before pulling the trigger. His right hand moved strangely and the crossbow shuddered. If anyone saw it, they would think it was due to nerves, but they couldn't be more wrong. The 5 arrows imbued with mana sliced through the air, moving at speeds almost on par with a bullet. But the most surprising thing was that the 5 were not moving in a straight line and slowly separated from the trajectory they were traveling. The 5 snakes opened their jaws just as the 2 mutated dogs charged toward Bai Zemin. However, just before they could fire their skill, their eyes blasted out in a bloody mist. The 5 snakes involuntarily canceled their skill and hissed in pain as they writhed furiously all over. Their scales were one of the strongest defenses among first-order creatures, yet their eyes were the weakness of any living thing. As they writhed in pain, 4 of them collapsed the walls of some nearby buildings, while one of them viciously struck one of the green-spotted mutated cats that were also charging towards Bai Zemin, blowing it away and sending it crashing into an adjacent building. The mutated cat had an agility-based proficiency, but its defense was among the lowest. Therefore, after being struck by a crazed mutated snake whose scales were incredibly hard and whose flesh was tightly compressed, the internal organs of the beast that did not expect such an attack broke out, killing it immediately. The wind howled, and the 2 mutated cats that charged towards Bai Zemin suddenly stopped and began to attack the mutated snake that had killed the other mutated cat, becoming entangled in a battle to the death. The mutated snakes had high defense and great strength. A single blow was enough to end the life of a green-spotted mutated cat. However, the mutated cats were not easy prey either. One of the cats leaped forward, and its claws glowed with a pale green glow. The beast slashed viciously and tore through the mutated snake's defenses with ease, tearing a large chunk of flesh and causing the snake to howl in pain. The snake hissed painfully and attacked with its tail again. But the mutant cat had already seen the miserable fate of its companion, so it hastily jumped to the side, avoiding a certain death by a hair's breadth. In addition, the other mutant cat also joined the fray, and between the 2 of them began to slowly wear down the mutated snake. You have received the soul power of First Order Spiny Dog, level 35. You have acquired magic plus 10, mana plus 10, strength plus 5, agility plus 2. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Spiny Dog, level 36. You have acquired magic plus 5, mana plus 4, strength plus 2. Blood will, 5.8%. Nice! Bai Zemin ended the lives of the 2 mutated dogs and couldn't help but praise when he saw the mutated snakes that were giving him a headache, writhing all over the place with one of their eyes covered in blood. He couldn't get close before because the 5 snakes were extremely cunning and surrounded him, attacking from places that made it difficult for him to reach. However, thanks to Chun-He's timely intervention, that problem was now gone. Bang! Bai Zemin stomped on the ground, and cracks spread everywhere before he disappeared from his position. After disappearing from his position and without having to change his course consistently after losing the harassment of the mutant snakes, Bai Zemin's terrifying speed, now unimpeded, was on full display. With nearly 200 agility points, the distance between him and one of the mutated snakes was closed in a moment. The beast hissed in pain, and upon seeing him immediately retaliated by spitting out an orb of acid. Bai Zemin leaned at an unnatural angle to the left, as if his body was made of rubber, avoiding what could be certain death. Taking advantage of that same movement, he swung his sword from above downward and fiercely slashed the mutated snake's body. Clang! Surprisingly, the mutated snake's scales could not be cut, and for the first time since he obtained the Xianyuan sword, he failed to break through his enemy's defenses. Not only were the snake's scales extremely tough, but Bai Zemin could also feel a strange slippery liquid that when he cut earlier caused a sword blade to slip and lose a great deal of its power. The mutated snake swung its tail like a whip and struck forward with a look filled with murderous intent. The power of its tail was terrifying enough to slay another first-order creature with a single strike, which was proof enough of how dreadful it was. However, Bai Zemin secretly sneered, and instead of dodging, he stepped forward as he slammed his left fist fiercely. Bang! When the human's small fist and the beast's tail, with a thickness of over a meter, collided, the normally expected scene of a human being crushed did not happen. The mutated snake hissed painfully once again, and its body was sent flying like a kite with a broken string before thunderously slamming into a building and collapsing it in the process. Bai Zemin did not give the creature time to prepare and lunged forward while sheathing his sword. After arriving next to the snake, he sat on top of its head and clamped his legs tightly around it before beginning to strike mercilessly with both fists. Bang! 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 The difference between the previous Bai Zemin and the current one was not small by any means. After evolving to First Order and successfully acquiring his Berserker Blood job, he gained a great increase of power, not only in the stats scrolling on his status window. As a Berserker, Bai Zemin's attack power increased by 20% when he used certain weapons or his bare hands. Therefore, his strikes at this time were actually several times more powerful than normal, and, as if this wasn't enough, he was also receiving a boost of almost 6% thanks to his new passive skill not yet observed by him. The mutated snake opened its single eye wide and howled in pain. The beast began to writhe endlessly but failed to shake Bai Zemin in any way. Even when it hit other buildings in the process, it failed to shake him off its back. Its scales split and blood began to flow, but Bai Zemin's blows did not stop, and in less than 2 seconds he had already struck a few dozen times. The mutated snake's wild movements slowed down noticeably, and the sparkle in its eyes slowly faded, showing that its life was coming to an end. Swoosh! Bai Zemin sensed danger from behind, but he didn't need to turn around to know who the attacker was this time. Just judging by the sound of the wind, it was obvious that it wasn't any of the other 3 mutated snakes. It was the giant bee. He laughed coldly, and as his fists blasted against the mutated snake's head, he said nonchalantly, "Wall of blood." Surprisingly, a 2-meter-high wall rose from the pool of blood accumulated from the death of so many sizable beasts, separating him and the giant bee. Mana's expenditure this time had been considerable, 20 points to raise the wall. But this was also normal since he had not yet mastered this new energy in any way, and like Shangwan Bing Shui, had only an initial understanding. It with Diaries Espada. However, what happened next was most surprising. When the giant bee's sting hit the wall, it seemed to pass through it as if it were a puddle of water, without any difficulty whatsoever. In fact, it even formed ripples, as if the wall of blood was not in a solid state. The giant bee's body began to glow slightly, and gradually its size began to increase. It was obviously absorbing enemy blood to become more powerful. However, how could Bai Zemin have forgotten about the mutated bee he killed on the first day of the apocalypse? Back then, the big bee had absorbed some of the zombie's body to become stronger. Berserkers were known as a melee class, with an attack power even more powerful than that of warriors in most role-playing games. However, Bai Zemin was actually a blood berserker. What was the difference? Magic. Blood spears. Bai Zemin's voice echoed throughout the battlefield. The wall of blood suddenly opened, and 2 huge red spears shot out like a torpedo. The giant bee did not even have time to retreat when its 2 wings were sliced wide open by the 2 spears that pierced through its weak defense with ease. The creature let out a strange yell and fell to the ground, unable to do anything but shake its body. Without its wings, the giant bee did not have enough power to move as it would like since its weight was too great for it, which had evolved by absorbing mana and not by absorbing soul power. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Jiaolao, Snake, level 45. You have acquired Strength +4, Stamina +2. You have reached level 34. Blood Will, 6.7%/50%. He dashed forward at full speed without rest, and before the mutated bee could even howl in pain, its head was ripped off its body after a sharp flash. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Bloodsucking, bee level 39. You have acquired Agility +5. Blood Will, 7.6%/50%. Gradually, the soul power he received from First Order creatures became thinner. The evolution experience was still corresponding, but the additional stats were less. As to whether it would stop or not, he didn't know yet. Bang! Suddenly, there was a bang on the battlefield, and Bai Zemin arrived, just in time to see Liang Peng hitting one of the mutated cats with green spots and sending it flying with his hammer. Oh! Bai Zemin raised an eyebrow and was surprised to see that while he was killing, Chun-He and Liang Peng hadn't been slacking off either. Apparently, at some point, one of the green-spotted mutated cats had been hit by the mutated snake, getting seriously injured. The mutated snake was still locked in a battle to the death with the other green-spotted mutated cat, so it could not break away, and Liang Peng took the opportunity to finish off the second cat. As for Chun, he was currently moving all over the place while shooting arrows at the last mutated snake that was chasing him. Although his arrows did not possess the power to pierce through the snake's defenses, as they were just normal arrows empowered by a bit of mana, they did cause enough pain to make the creature enraged. The mutated snake was faster, but Chun-He was cunning and jumped from building to building without getting caught. Every time a building was demolished, he jumped to another and continued. Moreover, the mutated snake did not dare to stop to cast acidic orbs, as it seemed to remember the consequences by feeling the pain in one of its now empty sockets. Thanks to the two of them, Bai Zemin had not been disturbed for a couple of seconds and was able to finish off 2 more First Order beasts. As for the last mutated snake, apparently, the beast realized that things were not looking good and quickly turned to flee. When Bai Zemin noticed it, he barely caught a glimpse of the beast's tail disappearing into the crimson flames in the direction of the forest. Using that liquid as a protective layer, the mutated snake might have a chance to flee in another direction, but if it stayed, it would definitely be slaughtered sooner rather than later. The green-spotted mutated cat that was facing the mutated snake was breathing heavily, and the glow on its claws had dimmed considerably. Its speed had slowed by at least 50%, and its entire body was bathed in sweat and dust. On the other hand, the mutated snake was riddled with slashes across the length and breadth of its body, revealing red flesh and gushing blood. The red glow in its eyes had dimmed, and its movements had become heavier than normal. Although the battle between the two creatures had only lasted a few seconds so far, both had given 101% of their total in order to end the life of the other. A single mistake could cost anyone their life, so during those few seconds they had activated their innate skill countless times, depleting stamina and mana without reserve. To grow stronger, to evolve, to take a step beyond. Each existence might have different motives, but they all wanted to stand victorious. Unfortunately, the destiny of the green-spotted mutant cat and the destiny of the Jiaolao snake was not to advance. Swoosh! The wind whistled noisily, and all the green-spotted mutant cat could see out of the corner of its eye was the metallic luster of a blade approaching its neck. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Gale Cat, level 40. You have acquired Agility +3. Blood Will, 8.2%/50%. The creature's head shot skyward, and the bright red blood of the Gale Cat was reflected in the eye of the Jiaolao snake. That was the last the beast could see before its head was severed from its body as well. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Jiaolao, Snake level 43. Blood Will, 9.1%/50%. No more extra stats from the Jiaolao, Snake soul power. Bai Zemin sighed as he shook the blood off his sword. Since the Jiaolao snake was weakened and riddled with wounds, killing it was easier than usual. Although it was a pity not to get more stats like that, it was something Bai Zemin expected to happen sooner or later. He stomped the ground beneath his feet and shot forward, following the booming sound a few hundred meters away. It only took him a couple of seconds to circle around the collapsed buildings to see the last living first-order beast chasing after Chun He and demolishing every building in its path with its tail. Such a scene was worthy of a science fiction movie, but now it was happening in reality right in front of his eyes. Even the most skeptical would be forced to accept that the world would never be the same in the face of such a horrifying view. The Jiaolao snake seemed to be able to sense Bai Zemin's overwhelming soul power as its head turned in his direction and looked at him coldly before lunging towards him as it constantly shot out acidic orbs. "That won't work if you're alone," Bai Zemin muttered and suddenly disappeared from his previous position. His speed burst completely, and in the next instant, he appeared right under the beast's body, right under its jaw. Boom! With a boost in his attack power of almost 30%, Bai Zemin's fist fiercely connected with the Jiaolao snake's jaws, sending it flying. However, to his and Chun He's surprise, the creature did not stand up again, and 2 orbs of light entered their bodies soon after, indicating the death of the enemy. You have reached level 35. Blood will, 10%. Apparently, Bai Zemin's blow had succeeded in destroying the brain from the outside, killing the creature with a punch. Bai Zemin gave Chun He a thumbs up before bending down to pick up the red-colored orb that had fallen next to the Jiaolao snake's death. In fact, not only had this snake dropped a treasure orb, for to Bai Zemin's delight, all the first-order creatures had dropped at least one red orb. Could it be that after the first order, there is always treasure? Bai Zemin would have to ask Lilith later. "Hey, Bai Zemin." Chun He approached agitated and tired, but his eyes were filled with worry as he anxiously asked, "Bing Shui? She's still not back. Shengguan Bing Shui?" Bai Zemin blinked before looking around. Between the excitement of successfully evolving to First Order, acquiring a powerful initial job, and the bloody battle against a dozen First Order existences, Bai Zemin hadn't had time to think too much about anything, so he only now realized that Shengguan Bing Shui was nowhere to be seen. With a cute new. The 2 men looked at the burning forest with different thoughts. Could she have been killed by those first-order beasts? Chun He asked in a low voice as he clenched his fists tightly. Bai Zemin remained silent and looked up at a building that was still intact in the midst of so much destruction. There, standing at the top, an incredibly beautiful woman to the point of taking the breath away from anyone who saw her was looking at him with a bright smile. Her hair waved in sync with the wind, and her ruby eyes made her look like an angel from heaven if it weren't for the enchanting aura of a demon that surrounded her. As if she knew what he wanted to ask just by his gaze, Lilith's voice reached his ears. "You have made this big sister very happy, little Zemin. This is the first time I see or hear about a first-order existence capable of wiping out a dozen in less than a minute and practically single-handedly. I wonder what you will become when you advance further in the order. Will you be able to satisfy this big sister in bed?" Bai Zemin almost spat out 2 liters of blood when he heard her last sentence. However, to his surprise, she sounded genuinely pleased and joyful, as if seeing his previous performance was a great delight to her. That aside, Lilith looked at the burning forest and said lazily, "That lower existence called Shengguan Bing Shui is not dead. She's still alive, but you'd better hurry if you want to get her out of there." He nodded imperceptibly and looked at Chun He before saying indifferently, "You wait here. I'll go get her out. Go with Liang Peng and take care of the treasures until I return." "What?" Chun He blinked and looked to his side, only to realize that Bai Zemin had already disappeared and was now several dozen meters away. His face turned pale as he realized how horrifying Bai Zemin's speed was and unconsciously glanced at the first-order Jiaolao snake's body. However, Chun He soon processed what he told him before, and his eyes shone. Take her out? So she was still alive. His legs felt weak, and he had to force himself forward. He had to protect those treasures, or if Liang Peng did something stupid, then no one would be able to stop Bai Zemin if he went crazy. Let alone now that he had seen what Bai Zemin was capable of actually doing during this battle to the death. The reasons why Bai Zemin decided to help Shangwan Bingshui were varied. One of the reasons was because she still had his bronze bell in her hands. The bronze bell was a very important magic grade treasure for Bai Zemin, as it was currently his safest defense, and he could not afford to lose such an item casually, as he did not know if he would be able to obtain another one anytime soon. In fact, the only reason he lent the bronze bell to Shangwan Bingshui at that time was because his breakthrough to First Order and the acquisition of his Blood Berserker job depended largely on whether she succeeded in pinpointing the location of a First Order creature. That way, he would be able to prepare his strongest attack from a distance great enough for his killing intent to be sensed by his enemy, or he might end up failing miserably. And if he failed, even he would have to flee poorly or be killed by the army of First-Order creatures. As for the other reason he decided to help her was to make her owe him a favor just as he owed her in the past. Shangwan Bingshui had mysterious origins, and even if the world had changed, her family had not necessarily collapsed. She was a proud woman and would certainly do her best to return the favor of saving her life, even if he did not ask for it. Besides, she was currently an important asset to the group of survivors, as there was no way Bai Zemin's eyes and arms could cover nearly 500 people. He needed survivors, or else the difficulty of reaching his family would become 1,000 times harder. In the current group of survivors, not only Fu Xiefeng, Kai Jingyi, Zhongde, and Kong Lan had the courage to fight. In fact, there were several male and female students who joined later who had enough courage to fight as long as they were given an appropriate weapon. When they finally left the university, things would be completely different than they were now, and Bai Zemin wanted to take advantage of that. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Arriving at the edge of the forest practically covered by burning crimson flames, Bai Zemin stopped and frowned under contemplation. If he had his bronze bell, it would be a simple task to exit and enter the place, since with his current agility, he could definitely travel several kilometers in about 1 minute. But without proper protection, even if he had evolved to become a first-order existence, he would definitely be injured and might even die. After all, even powerful beasts with high defense like the blazing beetle and the jiaolao snake were forced to flee from the flames, let alone him. After considering the problem for several seconds, he finally gritted his teeth and pulled out several bottles of blood before starting to spray his entire body from head to toe. In a few blinks of an eye, he had become a red person, and only the color of his eyes differed. The rancid smell of blood was truly foul, but his options were too tight at this point. Bai Zemin activated his blood manipulation skill, and the blood on his body shimmered under the stimulus of the mana. Soon, the blood that constantly collated hardened, forming a thin, insulating layer that separated him from his surroundings. Just close your eyes and move forward. I will guide you. Lilith appeared beside him and patted his shoulder lightly. Bai Zemin nodded and wordlessly stomped hard on the ground beneath his feet, lunging forward and stepping into the sea of flames. His current speed, with an agility of over 190 points, was equivalent to almost 20 times faster than a person before the apocalypse. This meant that at his maximum, he could overtake a supercar with ease before the arrival of the sole record on Earth. Bai Zemin's body flashed through the flames under the guidance of Lilith, who followed closely, unaffected by the surroundings. The embracing heat seemed intent on devouring his existence completely, and the solidified blood covering his body would have long ago evaporated already if it weren't for Bai Zemin constantly feeding the layer of blood with mana. However, even with his over 300 mana points, it was a terrifying expenditure that he could not sustain for too long. After all, the Crimson Flame was the remnant of a third-order skill. While it wasn't as strong now after the skill was cast, it still wasn't something that some blood of a first-order beast could casually endure. It with Tildoi, knowing that time was running against him like every passing second since the beginning of the apocalypse, Bai Zemin focused on Lilith's guidance and exploiting his speed to the maximum extent possible. The muscles in his legs tightened to the point where if it weren't for his high stamina and health, they would have been torn long ago. About half a minute later, Lilith's voice sounded magically in his ears. Right in front of you is a lake. That woman is inside. Bai Zemin didn't even think about it and jumped in, entering the water that was evaporating at terrifying speeds. He canceled his blood manipulation skill, and the blood on his body was immediately washed away by the water. When Bai Zemin finally opened his eyes under the crystal-clear water, the first thing he saw was the beautiful Shangwan Bing Shui submerged underwater, looking at him with her blue eyes wide open. It was as if she was asking him what he was doing there and why he had come. Too bad, Bai Zemin couldn't talk underwater, and neither could she, or else he would have told her. Nothing. I just came shopping. He approached to her and saw that her face was starting to get redder and redder as a result of the lack of air. Holding her breath for a minute or two was fine, since even if she didn't possess high physical stats, she wasn't weak either. The problem was that considering the time of the explosion and release of the flames so far, a couple of minutes had already passed, and she had been forced to hide underwater. Bai Zemin quickly pointed to the bronze bell, and fortunately, she seemed to understand what he meant as she immediately nodded and passed it to him. Fortunately, there was still some power left inside the bell before the treasure lost its energy and had to be recharged for a whole day. He naturally had no intention of kissing her like in romantic movies to share his oxygen with her. Bai Zemin turned around and pointed to his back while looking into her eyes, indicating her to jump up on his back. Shangwan Bing Shui secretly gritted her teeth and did not hesitate as she climbed on his back, riding him like a horse. Moreover, to his surprise, she did not doubt to wrap both arms around his neck and her legs around his waist, easing the burden on him immensely. Bang! Bai Zemin stepped onto the bottom of the lake fiercely and, taking advantage of the momentum, jumped upwards. While normally it would be difficult for a human's strength to fight against the pressure of the water on the body, for him it was a matter of effort. In just an instant, his body, together with Shangwan Bing Shui, who clung to him tightly, broke the surface of the lake that was struggling uselessly against the crimson flames. Upon returning to the surface, crimson flames immediately began to assault them both. However, before they could even touch the corner of their clothes, the bronze bell flew out of Bai Zemin's pant pocket and floated above his head, releasing a faint glow that surrounded the two of them. Bai Zemin began to run madly forward without stopping, surprising Shangwan Bing Shui by his frightening speed, but at the same time easing her worries. She unconsciously sighed in relief, and the tension in her body disappeared, causing her to relax on his back as she looked at the crimson world around them. No matter where she looked, all she could see was a blazing fire. Earlier, after killing a first-order beast alone for the first time, Shangwan Bing Shui noticed that the fire had surrounded the forest from the south to the east and then spread to the northern area, practically sealing off the exit. With no other choice, she remembered the water lake and returned to the place to seek cover. Although the bronze bell had power remaining, with her current agility, it was impossible to close the distance between the center and the exit of the forest in less than a minute, and she would be stranded halfway. Fortunately, Bai Zemin's agility was just enough to get out unscathed with the support of the magic barrier. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Outside the flaming mutated forest, Chun-He waited anxiously beside Liang Peng. After collecting the treasure orbs, and also a few skill scrolls that had been transmuted by the soul record from the soul power of the first-order creatures killed earlier, Chun-He had not stopped looking in the direction of the burning forest. Damn it, can you stop moving? Liang Peng couldn't help but curse as he looked at Chun-He. You've been walking back and forth, and it's only been 2 minutes since you came here. You're getting on my nerves. Chun-He did not respond to him, nor did he seem to listen to what Liang Peng said. He was only worried about Shangwan Bing Shui, and no matter what anyone else said, it was not going to change by mere words. Tisk! Liang Peng clicked his tongue and muttered something that only he could hear, but they were obviously not too nice words. Bang! Suddenly, there was a bang from within the flames, and when the two men looked over, they arrived, just in time, to see two people surrounded by a thin layer of yellow energy in the air. They finally came out. Chun-He was extremely happy to see that both of them had returned. Of course, he was happier for Shangwan Bing Shui, but he was also glad that Bai Zemin had not encountered any problems holding him back. Liang Peng looked at him and wanted to say something, seeing how close those two seemed, but in the end, he swallowed his words, not wanting to ruin the mood. After almost 2 weeks of living together and working as a team, everyone was starting to get closer to each other. Bang! The ground broke out and dirt flew everywhere as Bai Zemin fell back down from over 10 meters high, planting both feet firmly on the ground. His face was slightly pale and his forehead was covered with sweat as his agitated breathing constantly made his chest rise and fall. Bing Shui, are you okay? Chenyi hurried over and looked her over from head to toe, still not noticing by the close contact they were having. You don't need to worry, I'm fine. But Shangwan Bing Shui got off Bai Zemin's back and looked at him with a frown before asking, Are you okay? With diuresis Sepsilin. Bai Zemin waved his hand without replying and walked with heavy steps over to the corpse of one of the Jiaolao snakes to sit on it. Why? Why am I so tired? Bai Zemin was dumbfounded. With his stamina, he should be able to fight for several hours without tiring, and although the battle to the death against the small army of First-Order beasts was fierce, it had not been to the point of consuming so much stamina as to leave him in such a miserable state. Bai Zemin. Status points, 52. Level, 35. Race, human. Job, Blood Berserker, Blood will mode. Title, 1 hit to kill. Strength, 150, plus 30, / agility. 186, plus 5, / health. 158, plus 5, / stamina. 202 / 282, plus 5, / mana. 292, plus 40, / magic. 249, plus 60. Skills, Blood Manipulation, First Order, LVL 5 / Special Forces Soldier, unranked passive skill. LVL 5 / Stoneheart, Third Order passive skill. LVL 5 / Health Boost, unranked passive skill. LVL 3 / Bronze Skin, First Order passive skill. LVL 1 / Throwing, unranked passive skill. LVL 5 / Regeneration, First Order. LVL 5 / Blood Will, Second Order passive skill. LVL 5 / Crimson Blood Judgment, Third Order. LVL 5. In fact, he still had a lot of stamina. However, Bai Zemin frowned and realized that he had lost 80 stamina points in a matter of 4 or 5 minutes, which was completely unnatural. The reason he suddenly felt so tired was precisely because of such an abrupt loss of almost 1/3 of his total stamina in such a short time. Bai Zemin's status window had practically changed completely after evolving to First Order, as he had finally made the first little big step. However, what caught his attention the most was the words Blood Will mode next to his Jaw Berserker Blood. Blood Will, Second Order passive skill. LVL 5. Going into combat mode awakens the desire for the battle that slumbers in your veins. You gain 0.1% additional attack power for every living enemy 100 meters around you, and 1% for every enemy killed. The effect is limited to a maximum of 50%. The effect lasts 5 minutes, and the timer resets to 0 for each enemy update. Secondary effect. Consumes 20 stamina points every 50 seconds as a consequence of the abrupt increase of power. The side effect is cancelled when the user goes out of combat mode. Bai Zemin sighed and finally understood the reason why he had lost so much stamina abruptly. Don't get so depressed. Lilith tapped his shoulder and smiled brightly. Blood Will is an incredibly powerful skill to be just classified as Second Order. Of course, it would have some side effect, or it would be nonsense. You should know that even I don't have a skill that increases my power by 50%. Bai Zemin nodded and said nothing to avoid being looked at as if he had gone mad, but looked at her with grateful eyes. If it wasn't for Lilith's moral support, he might not be able to stand as firmly as he did now. Besides, even though Blood Will had an annoying side effect, it wasn't as if he had no way to fight it. Although he could not solve the problem in its entirety, he could lighten the consequences to a great extent. After all, Bai Zemin had acquired the First Order regeneration skill. This skill allowed him to consume mana to obtain stamina in return, which was perfect for cases where he had to fight to the death and did not need to use magic skills or the effects of magic were not as efficient as was the case with the first-order anti-magic zombie. As Bai Zemin sat down to get some rest before returning to important business, he didn't even feel like looking at his newly acquired skills, nor did he feel like looking at which two skills he could evolve. The battle against the first-order beasts had not drained his stamina to dangerous levels, even when blood had been draining much of it. However, the mental exhaustion had been considerable, especially before the battle fully erupted. After all, before launching the blood trident enveloped by flames, Bai Zemin was very clear that if he failed to kill a first-order creature with a single shot, the odds of survival would plummet immediately. Therefore, although he appeared serene on the surface, he was actually under great mental pressure. Meanwhile, Shengwan Bingshui was looking at him with a frown, and her eyes seemed hesitant about something. However, soon her attention was drawn by the person beside her. Bingshui, are you really okay? What happened inside that forest? Chen He asked, still not feeling calm. Thanks to the treasure Bai Zemin gave me earlier, I'm fine. She nodded softly and observed the surroundings as she slowly explained what happened inside the forest. What? Several dozen first-order beasts. And, Bingshui, you're already level 25? Chen He exclaimed in fright and looked at her with wide eyes when he heard that she had killed a first-order creature single-handedly. But even more so, he was frightened to hear that there were so many terrifying beings inhabiting the mutated forest. Only now did Chen He realize how lucky he was to get out of that place alive yesterday. Yes. Shengwan Bingshui nodded a bit distractedly. She looked at Bai Zemin, who was resting with his eyes closed, and couldn't help but be surprised. Currently, she had already reached level 25 and had also received the message from the soul record in which she received a number of options to choose her job. Shengwan Bingshui naturally knew that advancing was not easy. However, seeing the destruction of the surroundings, the corpses of the first-order beasts scattered on the ground, and some of them in miserable conditions, Shengwan Bingshui finally fully accepted that the young man before her was simply a monster in human skin. Bai Zemin opened his eyes and sighed as he pulled out a chocolate bar from his backpack. However, before he began to eat it, he took out 3 more bars along with 4 cans of soda. He threw a bar and a can to each of them as he said with a somewhat exhausted smile, "Good job, everyone." Chen He, Shengwan Bingshui, and Liang Peng looked at each other before shrugging their shoulders. The 3 of them casually sat or simply stood and began to replenish their energies with bright expressions. No matter how small it was, everyone did their part today, being able to overcome the most difficult challenge since the apocalypse broke out and the world changed. A single mistake could have ended the whole group and the annihilation of nearly 500 people, as well as the hope of many others. Therefore, they were naturally happy, even if they did not say anything. Shengwan Bingshui even thanked Bai Zemin for trusting her enough to lend her such a valuable treasure, to which he responded with a casual smile. As for the matter of saving her life earlier, she said nothing, and he did not mention it either. They both seemed to understand each other's mind tactically, so words were unnecessary. After properly resting for nearly 30 minutes, Bai Zemin began to replenish his blood supply under the watchful eyes of the others. Although it was unpleasant, there was no choice in the matter, and he didn't want to die just because he didn't want to do some dirty work. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The survivors were waiting anxiously inside the first floor of the library building under the care of Kai Jingyi and the rest. The atmosphere in the place was extremely heavy, and there seemed to be a black cloud over everyone's head as no one dared to speak, and even those who spoke did so quietly in extremely small whispers. Occasionally, the eyes of the 400-plus survivors would unconsciously turn to the entrance of the building with hopeful eyes. However, each time their eyes receded in disappointment at not finding the people they were looking for, increasing the worry they felt even more. "How do you think the battle ended?" a male student asked quietly as his eyes drifted to the door. "I don't know. There's been no roaring and no explosions anywhere for a while now." Another survivor whispered back as he looked at Fu Xiefeng and the others before continuing, "I bet the battle is already over. Besides, even the 4 of them are moving anxiously and looking towards the door, so obviously what the group leaders are doing is not simple." How could it be simple? Lina, who was sitting nearby, overheard the conversation and couldn't help but raise her voice scared. They are facing an army of dreadful beasts that are as strong or stronger than that strange blue-skinned zombie. Lina, just like the rest, was incredibly scared, no? She was even more scared because she was aware of the danger the four leaders were facing this time. Therefore, she couldn't stop some word from slipping out of her mouth unconsciously. Blue-skinned zombie? What do you mean? The surrounding survivors became agitated upon hearing those words and looked at Lina for responses. In order to keep the chaos as controlled as possible, one person had proposed not to reveal the existence of the First Order beasts or monsters until the group had enough power to safely deal with them. Our Nigerian Thailand body, yes. Otherwise, letting the survivors know that there were even more terrifying enemies on the outside could cause some of them to go crazy and start losing their minds, making things difficult for everyone. Lina, Wu Yijuan called out, startling her friend. She had been the person who had planned the idea, and it was approved by Bai Zemin, Shengwan Bing Shui, Chunhe, and Liang Peng right away, as the four of them were aware of something so basic. Seeing Wu Yujian's serious and angry look, Lina realized that she had spoken too much and quickly lowered her head in embarrassment, but still frightened. Seeing Wu Yujian intervene, none of the survivors pressed the matter further, as they knew that she was technically like a sister to Shengwan Bing Shui, so no one dared to offend her. However, Lina's words had already aroused the alertness of some people, and the atmosphere quickly began to worsen. Although no one did anything stupid or wild, as yesterday's massacre was still firmly etched in everyone's mind, they all began to look towards the entrance in fear, waiting for the final verdict of their fates. Wu Yijuan also looked towards the entrance of the building, and her beautiful big eyes glittered with slight apprehension, not only for herself, but also for the safety of those who faced danger out there. While it was true that the sound of battle had ceased several minutes ago, only based on the terrifying roars and thunderous bangs, as well as the constant shaking of the ground, she knew that the battle that was currently raging was of such a magnitude that her mind was unable to comprehend, even if it was explained to her in words.